Dear listeners, Daphne is delighted to welcome you back to our familiar time slot today with a remarkable news story titled The Night Before My Heart. Surgery. My surgeon husband insisted on operating himself, whispering, "Who knows your heart better than me?" I nodded, moved, but at midnight the nurse slipped me a note. "Don't let him operate. Run, or it'll cost you your life." If you enjoy this story, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to keep listening to deeply Björg's emotional stories every day. I lay dead still on the white-sheeted hospital bed in the VIP suite on the first floor of a private hospital in Kensington, London, staring at the soft yellow strip lights on the ceiling. My throat was so dry that even swallowing saliva hurt. Outside the double-glazed windows, London at night was still dotted with the headlights of passing black cabs, while inside the room I could only hear the steady rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Each small beep echoed like a reminder that this heart was still beating, but tomorrow it would be cut open by the man I once called my husband. That man was Dr. Thomas Bennett, a renowned cardiothoracic surgeon at this hospital and the person who had been by my side for the past 5 years. That evening, he sat by my bed for a long time. His white coat was impeccably pressed, the cuffs so clean they didn't have a single crease. The faint scent of the hospital antiseptic mixed with his familiar cologne made me feel both reassured and, for some inexplicable reason, sent a chill down my spine. Seeing me unconsciously gripping the edge of the duvet, Thomas reached out and covered my hand. His fingers were warm and soft, just like countless times before. He gently pried my fingers loose and smiled. "Don't be so tense, Maddie. It's just a valve repair, nothing too terrifying. I'll be the one operating on it. You. Who knows your heart better than me?" I turned to look at him. I had looked at that face through so many seasons of rain and shine, from the days I was just a girl cherished by my father at Arthur Pharmaceuticals to the moment I became a wife waking up in the middle of the last night with chest pains. Thomas was still handsome in that distinguished, mature way. He spoke softly, and wherever he went, he made people trust him, effortlessly. But for some reason, in that exact moment, when he said he knew my heart better than anyone else, a strange feeling washed over me. It was as if I were looking at an acquaintance through a very thick pane of glass. I asked, my voice hoarser than I expected, "Does it have to be you operating? I know you're brilliant, but you're my husband. What if you get into the theater and the pressure gets to you?" His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, so fast that if I hadn't been living in a state of constant anxiety these past few days, I probably wouldn't have noticed. He leaned down and kissed my forehead, his voice remaining gentle. "Don't be silly. Precisely because I'm your husband, I can't bear to hand you over to anyone else. Madeline, you are my family. I won't let anything happen to you." That kiss was strangely cold. I shrank back slightly, and he, thinking I was just scared, pulled the duvet up a bit higher. Right then, the door cracked open, and a nurse stood outside reminding him, "Dr. Bennett, the theater staff are waiting for you to review tomorrow's files." Thomas replied briefly, "I'll be right there." He turned back to look at me, his eyes carrying that usual mix of affection and sternness. "I've told the nurse to give you a mild sedative. Get some sleep, and when you wake up tomorrow morning, everything will be fine. Stop overthinking, all right?" I wanted to tell him that my recent fears weren't about dying, but about the terrifying realization that I no longer had the power to decide anything in my own life. Since my father passed away, and since I was diagnosed with this heart condition, Thomas had arranged everything: my medication, my clinic, appointments, the company files, and even who was allowed to visit me. He cared for me so meticulously that everyone praised me for being lucky. But the more I was cared for, the more I felt like a precious antique locked securely in a glass display cabinet. Ultimately, I just nodded. He ruffled my hair one last time before leaving the Balsas room. His tall silhouette disappeared behind the door, leaving behind the rhythmic beep-beep of the machine and a silence so heavy it was suffocating. The sedative began to take effect. My eyelids grew heavy, and my mind became cloudy, as if being dragged into thick fog. In that groggy state, I heard a sound of a medication trolley rolling down the corridor, the chatter of nurses changing shifts, and then very faint voices coming from somewhere near the end of the hall. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but a few disjointed words brushed against my ears, making my heart race. A woman's voice asked, sounding tense, "Are you sure about this dose? What if she wakes up halfway through?" A deeper male voice replied, "She won't wake up. Just stick to the plan. The inheritance paperwork is sorted. The important thing is that post-surgery it has to look like natural complications." My eyes snapped open. The ceiling was still the ceiling. The light was still a soft yellow. The machine was still beeping steadily, and there were no voices in the corridor anymore. There was only cold sweat running down my spine. I tried to reassure myself that maybe I had misheard. Maybe the sedative was messing with my mind, maybe the word inheritance had nothing to do with me. But there are times in life when intuition doesn't use words. It just squeezes your heart to remind you that if you lie still, you will never get the chance to sit up again. I looked at the wall clock. It was past 2 a.m. A moment later, the door opened again. A young nurse walked in, her face half covered by a mask, carrying a thermometer tray. I remembered seeing her a few times in the VIP wing, but we had never spoken privately. She gave a very slight nod. "Miss Madeline, I need to take your temperature." I looked at her, the voices from the corridor still echoing in my head, so I didn't dare ask anything. She stepped closer to the bed. Her movements were completely normal, but her eyes were not. They were red and terrified. As she placed the thermometer under my arm, a small folded piece of paper slipped from her sleeve and landed right next to my fingers. I jolted and looked at her. She didn't speak, just shook her head slightly. Her eyes signaled me to hide it. I grabbed the piece of paper in the palm of my time-80 hand. It felt so thin that even a slight squeeze might tear it. After taking my temperature, she jotted down a few numbers on her clipboard and walked out very quickly. Before closing the door, she turned to look at me one last time. I would never forget that look. It wasn't the look of someone trying to scare me. It was the look of someone who had seen something they shouldn't have, knew something they shouldn't know, and was using their last ounce of courage to pull a stranger away from the edge of a closeted cliff. Once I was sure there was no one outside, I unfolded the paper. The words hit me like a physical blow. "This surgery cannot happen. Run." My hands were shaking so much that the paper made a faint rustling sound. I stared at it for a long time. Such a short sentence, yet it was enough to shatter 5 years of marriage within me. Why did I need to run? Who wanted to harm me? Did Thomas know? Or was he the one orchestrating this? I didn't want to think about the final answer. Because just as it began to take shape in my mind, my chest ached as if someone were sawing at it with a blunt knife. 6 months ago, I had collapsed during the annual general meeting of Arthur Pharmaceuticals. When I woke up, I was already in this hospital. Thomas, with red-rimmed eyes, told me I had a rare heart valve disease. If I didn't have surgery soon, it would be fatal. Afterwards, he advised me to step back from work temporarily, saying he and the legal team would handle the executive duties. My father had only recently passed away at the time. I was too exhausted to suspect anyone. People are usually at their most vulnerable when they've just lost their main pillar of support. And I had completely leaned on the husband I believed loved me more than anything in the world. But a perfect play is still just a play. And if it's too perfect, it becomes terrifying. I sat up very slowly and pulled the IV drip from the back of my hand. A small trail of crimson blood oozed out. I pressed a cotton pad over it, my mind unusually sharp. My father had taught me something since I was a child, something that might sound ridiculous for a girl growing up in luxury. Wherever you go, always leave yourself a way out. In the hospital wardrobe, I had a set of normal clothes, some cash, a burner, phone, and an encrypted USB stick. When I was preparing to be admitted, Thomas had even laughed at my paranoia, saying I was staying in a VIP suite, not going trekking in the wilderness, so why would I need an emergency grab bag? I had laughed along with him then. Thinking back now, it only made my nose sting with unshed tears. I changed into my clothes with trembling hands, wore an oversized coat to cover the bandage on my arm, and returned to the bed. I tore a piece of paper from the medical chart and scribbled quickly, Thomas, I got too scared, so I went out to get some fresh air. I'll be back by morning, don't worry. I deliberately made my handwriting messy, like a patient in a momentary panic. If Thomas truly loved me, that note would at most make him worry. But if he wanted me dead, it might buy me a few hours of life. The main door definitely had CCTV. I didn't dare use the corridor. I opened the cyano window and looked down at the small courtyard at the side of the hospital. Thankfully, the room was only on the first floor, with bushes and a drainage pipe running down the brick wall. My heart was pounding so hard my chest physically ached. Someone diagnosed with a severe heart condition shouldn't be climbing down walls. But right then, my logic was simple. If I was going onto the operating table tomorrow to die, why bother saving my strength? I gripped the pipe and slid down into the damp London night. A branch tore my trousers, grazing my calf and drawing blood. I bit my lip until it bled to stop myself from crying out. When my feet hit the ground, I crouched low, running through the back alley, hugging the hospital perimeter fence before blending into a quiet street. I didn't dare hail a black cab right outside the gates. I walked past 3 streets, past a brightly lit off-license, past a few delivery mopeds parked on the pavement before finally flagging down a taxi heading towards Camden. The night wind blasting against my face was freezing. I clutched my small bag tightly to my chest. In my mind, the image of Thomas leaning down to kiss me kept playing on a loop. I wondered if, upon discovering my escape, he would be frantic with worry for his wife, or furious that his prey had escaped the prey Asso. Butcher's Block? At nearly 3 a.m., I walked into a 2-4-hour internet cafe tucked away in a small Camden alley. The owner eyed me up and down. Perhaps my face was too pale or my coat had a bit of mud on it. But he only asked, standard PC or private booth? I handed him the cash, trying to keep my voice steady. A booth in the corner, as hidden as possible, please. Sitting in front of the computer monitor, I plugged in the encrypted USB stick and logged into the hospital's internal server using the access credentials my father used to hold as a pharmaceutical supplier. He had taught me from a young age that trusting people is necessary, but trusting without verifying is like handing someone the noose to hang you with. Back then, I thought he was too cynical. It wasn't until tonight that I realized some lessons are paid for in blood. I opened the CCTV archive from the last 3 months, filtering for Thomas's office and the anesthesiology room. The cold blue light from the screen washed over my face. I fast-forwarded through hours of meaningless footage until Thomas Loke appeared, working late in his office. Sitting opposite him was Dr. Victoria Hale, the deputy head of anesthetics. The same woman who always spoke so politely and called me Maddie with such sisterly affection. I turned up the volume. In the video, Victoria placed a folder on the desk, her voice faint but clear. The anesthetic dose has been adjusted. If everything goes to plan, she won't wake up in the first 72 hours. Thomas pushed up his glasses, his face completely devoid of emotion. It has to look like post-operative complications. The more naturally she dies, the less hassle we'll have. I sat frozen in front of the screen. Outside, London still hummed with the occasional siren, but inside me, something had just died a very clean death. I used to think that when a marriage died, there had to be a loud noise like a glass shattering, someone screaming and crying, or at least a brutal confession, thrown in each other's faces. But that night, my marriage died amidst the whirring of an old PC fan in a Camden internet cafe bathed in the pale blue light of a monitor delivered in the calm voice of the husband I had trusted more than myself. On the footage, Thomas sat perfectly straight, his hands resting on the desk, a familiar posture he adopted whenever reading medical charts. Victoria frowned slightly. Are you sure? Madeline isn't an idiot. If she wakes up before we've prepared everything, it'll be a massive headache. Thomas gave a hollow laugh. She trusts me. The longer someone is pampered, the more they lose their self-defense reflexes. Besides, over the last few months, the heart condition records, medications, and psychological evaluations are all thoroughly documented. Even if she claims she's being poisoned, outsiders will only see a hysterical patient suffering from the shock of losing her father. Hearing that, my hand clamped around the mouse, my nails digging painfully into my palm. But that physical pain was nothing compared to the sensation of having my own stupidity peeled away layer by layer. For the past few months, every time I struggled to breathe, Thomas would carry me to A&E. Every time I felt weak, he would place pills in my hand and gently coax me. "Take them, darling. Be a good girl, so your heart can heal." I had thought that was love. It turns out, sometimes that's just how a farmer fattens a pig for the slaughter. Victoria flipped another page of the file. "The amended will has been notarized. If she dies, you are the legal beneficiary of the vast majority of her personal assets. As for the shares in Arthur Pharmaceuticals, we need the guardianship step completed before the complications occur." Thomas answered briskly, "No rush. After the surgery, I will be the only one with the right to sign off on her medical decisions. While she's in a coma, I'll temporarily manage the company affairs. Once the public has offered enough sympathy, the shareholders will naturally choose stability." The man on the screen looked nothing like the man who stood at the altar, holding my hand before the vicar, promising my father he would look after me for the rest of his life. Yet, it was the exact same face, the exact same lips, discussing my death as if it were a mere administrative procedure. The video lasted less than 10 minutes, but it was enough to destroy everything. I cut and saved the file, encrypted it onto my USB, and backed it up to a secret cloud server. My mind at that moment was terrifyingly clear. Perhaps when pain reaches a certain threshold, humans lose the ability to cry immediately. Only, the primal instinct to gather evidence and survive remains. Just as I was about to log off, my private email inbox pinged with a notification from my bank. I opened it out of habit and froze. A large trust fund left by my father was about to mature, accompanied by a notice updating the beneficiary status based on marital legality. I stared at the long string of numbers on the screen and suddenly understood why Thomas needed me to die. Naturally, if I died on the operating table in a hospital he controlled, he wouldn't just be the tragic widower. He would be the legal recipient of the money, the power, and the pity of the entire country. I let out a very faint laugh. It was so cold that even I found it strange. For 5 years, I had been moved by the honey lemon tea he made me in the mornings. I thought I was blessed to marry a man who knew how to cook porridge when I was ill, who rubbed my back when I was tired, who remembered the anniversary of my mother's death better than some of my own relatives. Thinking back now, I didn't know how much of that gentleness was real, and how much was the patience of a breeding and Evertian predator. I picked up my burner phone and dialed a number I hadn't called this late in a too long time. It rang 3 times before the person on the other end picked up. The deep male voice was slightly raspy from sleep, but very alert. "Madeline." Hearing just my name, my throat seized up. Philip Knight was my family's private solicitor, and the person my father trusted most after my mother died. He was 2 years older than me, a man so principled that I used to joke that if the sky fell, he'd probably check the insurance clauses before running for cover. Philip never crossed the line into overly familiar territory with me, always maintaining professional distance. But since my father's death, he was one of the rare people who didn't look at me like a fragile patient. I tried to speak as quickly as I could. "Philip, I'm outside. I just escaped from the hospital. Thomas wants to kill me." There was exactly 2 seconds of silence on the line. He didn't ask, "What are you talking about?" He didn't even say, "Calm down first." Philip only asked, "Where are you?" I looked around and read out the name of the alley. He replied immediately, "Don't go out onto the main road. Don't call anyone else. If anyone asks, say, you're waiting for a relative. I'll be there in 15 minutes. For some reason, that sheer composure made my eyes burn. There are people who love you with beautiful words but push you onto the operating table. And there are people who never utter a single sweet sentence, but when you call at 3 a.m., they show up without asking pointless questions. While waiting for Philip, I continued checking the company's system using my father's old admin account. Over the past 3 months, 3 massive sums had been transferred from Arthur Pharmaceuticals to an intermediary shell account, offshore. The approver listed was me. But on all 3 days the transfers were made, I was in the hospital on an IV drip. On one of those days, I had a fever so high I couldn't even sign my discharge papers. I took photos of everything. The more I looked, the colder my heart grew. Thomas's greed hadn't just flared up recently. He had been laying the groundwork for a long time. From the moment I collapsed in the boardroom, from my father's sudden death, from the moment he urged me to leave my job because health is more important than money, every loving phrase had been a brick, building a wall. Around my grave, Philip arrived while it was still dark. He wore a gray shirt, his hair slightly messy, with dark circles under his eyes, but his gaze was sharp. As soon as he walked into the internet cafe, he didn't call my name loudly. He walked straight to the corner booth, placed a long trench coat and a face mask on the desk. He noticed the blood on my calf, and his voice dropped. "You're hurt." I shook my head. "It's fine. Just scratched by a branch climbing down." Philip looked at me for a few seconds as if wanting to say something, but ultimately just handed me the coat. "Put this on, out the back door, from now on, until we have solid evidence. Do not let Thomas know you are with me." I stood up, my knees buckling slightly because I hadn't eaten all night. Philip quickly reached out to support my elbow, then immediately let go. His restraint was so measured that it suddenly made my chest ache. If it had been the old Thomas, he would have wrapped me in his arms, scolded me for not taking care of myself, and murmured sweet nothings until I melted. Philip was different. He didn't turn my weakness into an excuse to control me. He merely caught me right before I fell. We got into an old 7-seater parked in the alley. The driver was one of Philip's associates. Without a word, he handed me a bottle of water and some tissues. The car headed towards Croydon, avoiding the main arterial roads. Sitting in the back seat, watching the city retreat through the window, I felt completely hollow inside. Philip opened his laptop to quickly review the files I had saved. The more he read, the heavier his expression became. When he reached the part where Thomas discussed the post-operative complications, he paused for a long time before closing the laptop. I asked quietly, "Do you believe me?" Philip turned to look at me. His eyes held no pity, nor any suspicion. He said, "I believe the evidence, and I believe Arthur didn't raise his daughter to be someone prone to delusions." I smiled, but tears finally spilled over. He wasn't gentle in a romantic novel sort of way, yet his words pierced straight to the softest part of my heart. Since my father passed, few people mentioned him with such respect. People usually talked about my father as a legacy, a massive fortune, a looming shadow. Only Philip still spoke of him as a father who taught his daughter how to stand tall. The safe house was a flat on an upper floor of an old estate in Croydon. The metal gate squeaked slightly. The living room was small but spotless. Philip explained that this was a flat he used to protect witnesses in complex corporate disputes. It wasn't under his name, nor was it tied to his firm. I sat down on the sofa, only then realizing my entire body was trembling violently. Philip placed a glass of warm water and a slice of toast in front of me. He said, "Eat a little. If you want to fight a war, don't pass out before the battle starts." I stared at the toast, suddenly blurting out something completely inappropriate. "Do you always speak to women in distress as dryly as a legal contract?" Philip froze. Then the corner of his mouth twitched upward slightly. If sweet talk could save lives, Thomas would be a good man. I stayed silent for a few seconds, then burst out laughing. A distorted, tear-streaked laugh, but a real one. It was fortunate that, on a night where I lost almost everything, I could still laugh at such a dry remark. Not long after, the morning news began broadcasting on the TV. Thomas's face appeared outside the hospital gates. He was wearing his white scrubs, eyes red, voice choking as if he were about to cry. My wife recently lost her father, and her health is fragile, so her mental state has been unstable. Last night, she left the hospital on her own accord in a very dangerous condition. If anyone sees Madeline, please contact our family or the hospital. I just want her to come home safely. A reporter asked if I was suffering from a psychological illness. Thomas looked down, staying silent for a long time before answering, "I am her husband, so I didn't want to disclose this to the press. But it's true that lately she has been paranoid, suspecting that her loved ones are trying to bar her. I will do my utmost to get her the treatment she needs." I stared at the screen, my hands turning ice cold. He didn't just want to kill me. He wanted to murder my voice before I even had the chance to open my mouth. Philip switched off the TV. The room fell silent. He placed a notepad in front of me. Starting now, we have 3 things to do. 1. Find the nurse who saved you. 2. Test the medication you're currently taking. 3. Review all the paperwork processed after Arthur died. I looked up. What about the company? His gaze hardened. If you want to keep the company, first you have to keep your life. But I suspect those 2 things are entirely connected. I recounted my father's sudden death 3 months prior. At the time, we had a mild cold. But by midnight, his condition worsened into acute heart failure. Thomas was the one who signed the death certificate and the one who persuaded me against requesting an independent post-mortem, saying we should let Dad rest in peace. At the time, I was constantly hospitalized with severe chest pains, my mind a mess. I trusted him, even feeling grateful that he handled my father's funeral so perfectly. Philip was taking notes when his pen suddenly stopped. He asked, "Your father's death certificate was signed by Thomas?" I nodded. Philip immediately opened his laptop, using his legal access to the 90 family's archives to pull up the scanned death certificate. A few minutes later, he turned the screen towards me. The words "acute heart failure, natural causes" were clearly visible, followed below by the signature of Dr. Thomas Bennett, acting as the attending physician and son-in-law of the deceased. Philip looked at me, his expression so grim I hardly dared to breathe. He said, "Slowly, Madeline, if Arthur died while taking medication controlled by Thomas, and without an independent autopsy, then your father's death cannot be considered a closed case." I stared at my husband's signature beneath my father's death certificate. In my head, Thomas's voice from the video echoed again. "The more naturally she dies, the less hassle we'll have." I had thought my father's death was the greatest agony of my life, until I discovered that the man I called my husband might have plunged his hands into that very wound. The feeling wasn't like being betrayed in love. It was deeper, dirtier, and far colder. It was as if someone had dug up my family's grave and forced me to scrutinize every detail I had hurriedly buried under the guise of fate. Later that morning, before London had fully woken up, I was sitting in the car with Philip, heading towards Richmond. The safe house in Croydon had barely playing /20 side in. Warmed up before we had to leave, because Philip insisted there was someone we absolutely had to meet before Thomas realized I was lucid enough to reopen my father's case files. That person was Dr. Henry Lawson, an old friend of my father, a retired pharmacologist who still maintained a small private lab at his home. I sat in the back seat, clutching a folder tightly, watching the rows of houses glide past the window. The same question kept echoing in my mind. If my father truly was murdered, why didn't he tell me? Then, immediately, the brutal answer stabbed my heart. Maybe he wanted to, but I was too busy trusting my husband, too busy taking the pills Thomas handed me, too busy lying in a hospital bed, thinking I was the most pitiable person in the world. Philip sat beside me, a tablet in his hand, occasionally jotting down notes. He didn't ask if I was okay, likely knowing the question was pointless right now. How could someone who suspects their father was murdered possibly be okay? But he quietly slid an already unscrewed bottle of water towards me, his voice very low. "Take a sip. When we meet Dr. Lawson, you might have to hear some very unpleasant things." I took the bottle and forced a smile. You always deliver bad news with the calm tone of a weather forecaster. Philip glanced at me, his lips twitching slightly. "Because if I panic with you, we might as well surrender right now and save ourselves the trouble." That remark made me let out a soft chuckle, not out of joy, but because amidst this chaos, Philip's dry pragmatism acted like a cool stone in a feverish palm. It didn't take the pain away, but it stopped me from falling apart. Living with Thomas, I was used to being coddled with sweet words, with "I'm here, don't be scared, good girl." Hearing Philip's blunt, grounded way of speaking, I realized that tenderness doesn't always have to be soft. Sometimes, tenderness is someone refusing to let you drown in your own emotions. Dr. Lawson's house sat on a quiet street in Richmond, an old bougainvillea. Trellis framed the front gate. Philip rang the bell 3 times. A moment later, the door cracked open. Dr. Lawson appeared in his dressing gown, his silver hair messy, still looking half asleep. But as soon as he saw me, his eyes widened, and he hurriedly pulled us inside. terrified the neighbors might see. Maddie, good heavens, what are you doing here at this hour? The news says. You're missing. Thomas claimed you bolted from the hospital in critical condition. Hearing Thomas's name from his mouth made my stomach churn. Before, both my father and Dr. Lawson had admired Thomas. They used to sit drinking tea, talking about the hospital, the business, while I sat beside them, thinking my life was so peaceful it could never break. But a life doesn't collapse with a loud explosion. It rots quietly from the inside, until the moment you realize it only lusteen. Takes one night for everything to turn to rubble. Philip closed the door behind us, speaking quickly but politely. Dr. Lawson, I am Philip Knight, Arthur's solicitor. We need your help to test a medication sample and to discuss something regarding Arthur's death. Dr. Lawson's face changed instantly at the mention of my father. He asked no further questions, simply leading us into his study at the back of the house. The small room smelled of old paper and reagents, with several carefully labeled glass vials on the desk. I took the heart medication I had brought from the hospital, wrapped in tissue, and placed it on the desk. Dr. Lawson stared at the pill for a long time before slowly looking up. Is this your heart medication? I nodded. Thomas has been giving it to me for months. He said my heart was failing and I needed to take it religiously to stabilize before surgery. Dr. Lawson didn't pick up the pill immediately. His hands rested on the edge of the desk, his aged fingers trembling slightly. He turned around, opened a small safe hidden in a bookcase, and took out a slightly frayed brown folder, placing it in front of me. Just seeing my father's handwriting on the corner of the envelope made my throat constrict. Your father brought some pills here for me to test about a month before he died, Dr. Lawson said. He told me he had been feeling dizzy, his heart racing erratically, even though his routine checkups had been perfect. He suspected someone was tampering with his medicine. I stared at the folder, my mouth so dry I could barely speak. Why didn't you tell me? Dr. Lawson closed his eyes briefly, his gaze heavy with sorrow. I wanted to, but your father told me to wait until he had more proof because he didn't want to frighten you. You were constantly in and out of hospital at the time. He was terrified you wouldn't be able to handle it. He said something to me that I will never forget. He said, if it really is someone in the family doing this, telling Maddie too soon will put her in grave danger. I thought I had run out of tears the night before, but hearing that, my eyes burned fiercely. My father had been a decisive man his whole life, feared and respected in the boardroom, yet at the end of his life, he had to secretly suspect the son-in-law he trusted and hide it from his only daughter just to protect her. I opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside was a toxicology report. The conclusion was underlined in red pen. Sample contains arrhythmia-inducing stimulants and trace amounts of toxins that lead to heart failure over prolonged use. Philip stood beside me, his expression turning ice cold. He asked, do you still have the original sample, doctor? Yes, kept in a specialized fridge. Dr. Lawson turned to fetch a preservation box, speaking as he walked. When I gave him the results, I told Arthur to go to the police. But he said it wasn't enough. He wanted to trace where the medicine was swapped, who had access to his prescriptions, and why this coincided exactly with Thomas becoming heavily involved in Arthur Pharmaceuticals. The name Thomas Bennett dropped into the quiet room, making my chest ache as if squeezed by a vice. I gripped the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing. Seeing this, Philip stepped closer. He didn't touch me, but stood just close. Enough that if I fell, he could catch me. That measured distance made me want to cry more than an embrace ever could. Dr. Lawson returned and placed the box on the desk. He looked at me for a long time, with the eyes of an elder who was too late to fix a mistake. Maddie, tell me the truth. Do you have any proof against Thomas yet? I showed him the video from Thomas's office. When Dr. Lawson heard the line, the more naturally she dies, the less hassle we'll have, his lips pressed into a tight line, the veins popping on his clenched fists. After a long moment, he stood up, went to his desk drawer, and pulled out a small black USB stick. Your father left this with me. He said if anything happened to him, and you came looking for me on your own 2 feet, not brought here by Thomas, then I was to give this to you. The password is your mother's birthday. I took the USB. It was small and light in my palm, Yet it felt as if I were holding my father's dying breath. My mother died when I was 10. Her birthday was a number I would never forget because every year my father would buy white lilies, place them before her photo, and sit in the living room in complete silence. Philip opened his laptop for me. I typed in the password. A folder opened, containing 3 audio recordings, a few scanned documents, and a text file. I clicked the first recording. My father's voice emanated from the laptop. Speakers, sounding more exhausted than I remembered, but still clear. If you are hearing this, I probably didn't make it in time to tell you in person. Maddie, I'm sorry for letting a stranger step so deeply into our home. I covered my mouth, sniffing, terrified that if I breathed too heavily, I would shatter. His voice continued. Thomas has been heavily involved with the finance department lately. I discovered large sums transferred out using your electronic signature. Victoria also transferred back to his hospital at a time that is entirely too coincidental. I cannot draw conclusions yet. But you must remember this. If one day I am gone, do not trust the man who cries the loudest at my coffin. I buried my face in my hands. The image of my father's funeral flashed in my sender. Mind. Thomas, wearing a black suit, eyes red, standing by the coffin, supporting me every step of the way. All the relatives murmured about how lucky I was to have such a devoted husband. And I, my father's only daughter, had leaned on the gauter shoulder of the man who likely murdered him, weeping until I passed out. Dr. Lawson turned away, discreetly wiping his eyes. Philip silently paused the priand, recording when it ended. The room grew so heavy that even the ticking of the CD axis wall clock sounded deafening. I don't know how long I sat there, but when I finally looked up, there was no pity in Philip's eyes. Perhaps that was why I found the strength to stand up. I asked, "Did my father say who else we need to find?" Dr. Lawson thought for a moment, then nodded. Yes. He mentioned Dr. Charles King. Dr. King was the one prescribing your father's routine meds during his last 3 months. After your father died, I heard King abruptly resigned and moved back to the countryside. But I don't believe a doctor with a stable job at a major private hospital just vanishes like that. Philip immediately began searching on his laptop. He made a few quick phone calls, his tone clipped and sharp as a knife. 20 minutes later, he received a text message and turned the screen towards me. Charles King didn't go to the countryside. He's renting a cheap flat in Barking. The source says he lives very quietly, rarely goes out. I stood up instantly. I want to see him. Dr. Lawson looked at me, worried. You just escaped the hospital. Showing your face now is incredibly dangerous. I looked at the USB in my hand, my voice calm to the point of freezing. I've run away once. If I keep hiding, my father died in vain, and eventually, I'll just be dragged back to the operating table anyway. Philip didn't stop me. He simply picked up his phone and called someone named David Clark, telling him we needed surveillance support and an extraction route. Then he turned to Dr. Lawson. Doctor, please send the original medication samples and the test reports to us. If something happens to us, please forward everything to this address. Dr. Lawson took the paper Philip handed him, gripping it tightly. Before we left, he called out to me, placing a hand on my shoulder just as my father used to do. Maddie, your father loved you very much. Don't let any bastard use the name of love to hold a scalpel to your life. I nodded, letting the tears fall without wiping them away. There are words that don't make you weaker. They remind you exactly why you have to survive. We arrived at the Barking estate near midday. The narrow alley was cramped, mopeds parked tightly on both sides, the smell of cheap lunches mixing with the stench of dampness. Philip told me to wear a cap and mask, and to walk closely. Behind him, at the entrance to the block, a middle-aged man with a tough build and piercing eyes was leaning against a battered motorbike, smoking. That was David Clark. He glanced at me, then said to Philip, "Solicitor, your man is in flat 302. But, a heads up. He looks like a bloke who's been sleeping with ghosts for a month." Philip frowned. "Can you tone down the metaphors?" David shrugged. I was sugarcoating it. For some reason, that exchange made me want to laugh despite my racing heart. The 3 of us climbed the dim stairwell. The paint was peeling, and the bulbs flickered like an old horror film. Philip knocked 3 times on the door. Silence from inside. David stepped up, banged heavily, and shouted, "Dr. King, open up. If you don't, the next people knocking won't be us." A moment later, the door creaked open. The man standing behind it was so thin, his cheeks were hollow, his beard scruffy, his eyes bloodshot. The moment he saw me, the color drained entirely from his face. Miss Madeline." I pulled down my mask. "Dr. King, I need to talk to you about my father." He tried to slam the door, but David had already jammed his foot in the gap. Philip stepped forward, his voice polite but lethal. "Dr. King, we have the BIDE. Toxicology report on Mr. Arthur's medication, your prescription records, and reason to believe you are covering up a murder. Do you want to talk to us here? Or during an official police interrogation?" Charles King backed away, trembling. His flat was a disaster, half-eaten instant. Noodles on the table, cigarette butts, empty water bottles, the curtains drawn tight. A doctor who used to wear pristine white scrubs and bow respectfully to. My father now sat on the edge of a stained mattress like a hunted animal. I placed the toxicology report in front of him. "You prescribed this for my father. Why does it contain heart failure-inducing toxins?" He shook his head frantically. "I didn't know. The meds came from the hospital. Pharmacy. I only prescribed the standard protocol." Philip pushed another piece of paper towards him. "This is the dosage schedule. That's your signature. Don't play dumb. If you were coerced, you still have a chance to tell the truth. If you keep denying it, you'll stand in the dock, alongside a murderer." That last sentence broke him. Charles King collapsed, burying his face in his prochem. Hands, his shoulders shaking. After a long time, he spoke through his fingers. "They threatened my daughter. She's studying alone in Australia. They sent me photos of her dorm, told me if I breathed a word, she'd have an accident." My blood ran cold. Thomas wasn't just evil. He understood perfectly how to exploit human weakness. For me, it was my father. For Dr. King, his daughter. For others, it might be the fear of losing their jobs or their lives. He dissected people not with a scalpel, but by finding their deepest vulnerabilities. I asked, my voice choking. "My father knew, didn't he?" Dr. King nodded, tears spilling over his hands. "Mr. Arthur suspected the meds. He confronted me directly, but I didn't dare say anything. Afterwards, Dr. Bennett and Dr. Hale forced me to continue prescribing them. They said they only needed to weaken him for a while, so you could take over the company, and then they would have a way to control you. I never thought he would die so quickly. I really didn't." I stood up abruptly, because if I stayed seated, I feared I would lunge forward and strike him. Philip saw this and softly called my name. "Maddie." I closed my eyes, taking a very deep breath. I knew the most despicable person wasn't the shivering wreck in front of me, but forgiveness was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. I just said, "Where is the evidence?" Trembling, Charles King reached under the thin mattress on his bed and pulled out a USB and a plastic-wrapped folder. "The real medical records of your father are in here, along with a secret recording of a conversation between me, Dr. Bennett, and Dr. Hale. I kept it because I was terrified that one day they'd kill me too." David sneered. "If you're scared enough of dying to keep evidence, you're not. Completely a lost cause." Philip plugged the USB into his laptop to do a quick check. Thomas's voice echoed through the room, immediately cold and distinct. "If the old man doesn't die, we can't touch Madeline's shares. Charles, just do your part, and your daughter will be safe." Hearing the phrase "the old man" made my entire body shudder. My father, in Thomas's mouth, was no longer the man who trusted him, who walked me down the aisle and handed me over to him on our wedding day. He was just an obstacle that needed clearing. Right at that moment, the sound of heavy, urgent footsteps echoed up the stairwell. David immediately pressed himself against the door, peering through the peephole. His face changed. Two blokes in black suits coming up, not the landlord. Charles King turned ashen, stammering, "They're here. They know." Philip shoved the USB into his inner jacket pocket and grabbed my hand, pulling me up. David opened the back door of the flat, pointing to a narrow balcony connecting to the adjacent apartment. He spoke rapidly. "You two first. I'll hold them off." Just as I stepped onto the balcony, a massive thud shook the front door of flat 302. A man's voice barked, "Dr. King, open up. Gas inspection." Charles King slumped onto the floor, white as a sheet. As I scrambled over the projede, Narrow railing, I glanced back at him, a cowardly, pathetic man, but also the last living witness to how my father was murdered. Before I could say anything, the front door burst open. I don't remember exactly how I managed to clamber across that tiny balcony. I only remember Philip's hand gripping my wrist so tightly it hurt. Behind me was the sound of the wooden door being kicked off its hinges, followed by Charles King's terrified screams. There are moments when a person can no longer distinguish between bravery and being too petrified to stand still. I was exactly that, balancing on a mossy brick ledge, looking down at a concrete yard cluttered with corrugated iron and tangled wires. I had only one thought. I cannot let my father's USB fall into Wars. Thomas's hands. Philip helped me jump across to the neighbor's balcony. The owner, an elderly woman sitting there peeling potatoes, almost screamed when she saw three strangers leap over her railing. David was quicker. He pressed his hands together in mock apology and said briskly, "So sorry, Gran. We caught her. Husband cheating, just passing through. We'll come back and apologize properly." Later, the old lady stared at us, dumbfounded, probably trying to figure out what kind of cheating confrontation leaves everyone looking pale as ghosts. But thanks to that wildly mundane lie, she simply gaped and shuffled out of the way, amidst a life-or-death chase. I actually wanted to laugh at David's deadpan. Fabrication. Philip was not laughing. He dragged me down the back fire escape, whispering as we ran, "Don't look back. If anyone asks, you're my sister." Panting over the sound of thundering footsteps, I asked, "Why not your wife?" Philip missed half a beat before replying. In this situation, playing the sister causes fewer misunderstandings. David, running behind us, didn't forget to chime in. A solicitor through. Even when running for his life, the alibi has to be legally robust. It was a terrible dry joke, yet it made my suffocating chest feel slightly lighter. Perhaps human beings fight to live not just for justice or revenge, but because amidst the sprint, a few normal words remind us that we haven't been completely swallowed by the darkness. We burst out into the back alley just as the two men in black reached the bottom of the main stairwell. David quickly led us through a maze of narrow streets, cutting through a mechanic's garage, and bundled us into a battered Ford parked near a local market. As the car pulled away, I looked in the wing mirror and saw one of the men standing at the mouth of the alley, phone pressed to his ear, his eyes scanning the dense London traffic like a predator that had lost its prey. "What about Dr. King?" I asked, my voice still trembling. David drove without changing his expression. If they got here that fast, he was being watched. Dragging him with us wouldn't have saved him. It would have just got us all killed. But at least we got the evidence. I knew he was right, but my heart felt heavy. Just because someone is guilty doesn't mean you feel relieved when they are dragged away, especially when they had just handed you proof of your father's murder. I wondered if my father, when he realized he was being poisoned, had felt as utterly alone as I did now. He had his suspicions but didn't dare tell his daughter. And now I had the evidence, but I didn't know if I would be safe enough tomorrow to bring it to light. The car headed towards Croydon, but we didn't return to the safe house immediately. Philip took several phone calls in quick succession, his face growing tenser with each one. After the final call, he turned to me. "Thomas has filed an emergency injunction with the High Court. He's demanding temporary control over your assets and your medical proxy, claiming you lack mental capacity, are suffering from paranoia, abandoned your treatment, and are 70-72-3, a danger to yourself." I let out a laugh, but it sounded so dry even I cringed. He couldn't kill me, so now he wants to legally declare me insane. Philip said quietly. More accurately, he wants to turn everything you say into the ramblings of a madwoman. Once he does that, even if you hold real evidence, people will ask if you are lucid enough to understand it. I sat in silence. Only now did I truly understand why Thomas had fabricated both my heart records and my psychological evaluations. He wasn't just planning to murder my body, he had pre-built a coffin for my reputation and my voice. The man who used to lull me to sleep after a bout of chest pain now wanted the country to believe I was just an unstable wife who needed her husband to bring her home for treatment. Philip pulled out a folder from Dr. King's stash and cross-referenced it with my father's notes on the USB. He said, There is one thing that can block Thomas in the short term: Arthur's real will. If we can prove the will he's using is forged, his claim to control the company crumbles immediately. I looked at him, but where is the original? The question made me think of the old Victorian house in Hampstead. That was where my parents lived when they first started the business. Later, even after we moved to a sprawling mansion, my father kept that house as a quiet place too. Read and store sentimental items. When I was little, playing hide and seek with my mother, I accidentally saw my father opening a secret compartment behind the family portrait in his study. When I caught him, he laughed and said it was his secret stash for buying his daughter sweets without Mum scolding him. I told Philip about it. His eyes lit up, but then he immediately frowned. The old house is definitely being watched. If Thomas guessed Arthur hid documents, there his men will be waiting. We still have to go, I said, gripping the strap of my bag. If I wait for the court summons, I won't have anything left to defend myself. Philip looked at me for a long time. In his eyes there was worry, hesitation, and something softer that he always tried to hide. Finally, he exhaled. Fine. But this time, you have to listen to me. No running off alone, no direct confrontations, no losing your temper, even if you see Victoria or Thomas. I nodded. David glanced at us through the rearview mirror and said deadpan, and, if you run into me, feel free to lose your temper. I'm used to clients swearing their hey at me. I looked at him, feeling relieved enough to reply, don't worry if we survive. I'll write a 5-star review for your getting sworn at service. Philip turned to me, the corner of his mouth curving slightly, before quickly masking his face back into a stern expression. That tiny, fleeting moment felt as light as a breath, but for some reason, it stayed with me. Perhaps because, amidst being hunted by a murderous husband, a genuine smile was like a rope, pulling me back to feeling human. That afternoon, we prepared meticulously. David disguised himself as a delivery driver and deliberately clipped a parked car near the gates of the Hampstead house, creating a loud argument to draw the attention of the watchers. Philip stayed outside coordinating comms, while I wore a cleaner's uniform, a cap, and a face mask, carrying a bucket of supplies alongside a real cleaner David had bribed. The woman knew nothing. She just thought I was a temp covering a shift. The locks on the old house hadn't been changed. My key still worked. When the heavy wooden door creaked open, the smell of old sandalwood and dusty books hit me, making my knees weak. You can always tell when a house has been empty for a long time without anyone saying a word. The sofas were covered in white dust. Sheets, the dried flowers on the mantelpiece were brittle, and the slippers my father used to wear still sat at the foot of the cabinet. Looking at those slippers, my eyes stung so badly I had to bite my lip. If my father were alive, he would surely scold me for being reckless. Then he would brew me a cup of ginger tea, still scolding, while sliding a plate of biscuits towards me, just like always. Human beings are strange. When you lose a loved one, what hurts the most isn't the massive legacy they leave behind, but a pair of old slippers, a half-finished cup of tea, or a book with a folded corner on the very last page they read. I went straight to the study. The family portrait was still hanging on the wall. In the photo, I was about 10. Mum was wearing a cream dress, Dad standing behind us, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. I touched the glass, whispering in my heart, Dad, I'm here to get your letter. If you love me, help me one more time. I took the frame down, tracing my fingers along the wooden paneling behind it. Until I felt a slight depression, I pressed hard. A faint click sounded, and the secret compartment popped open. Inside was a sealed plastic document bag, some handwritten notes, a silver USB, and an envelope with my name on it. I opened the document bag first. My father's real will lay on top. It clearly stated I retained 60% of Arthur Pharmaceuticals, 30% was to be placed into a cardiovascular research charity for underprivileged patients, and 10% divided among long-serving employees. Thomas was only mentioned as a temporary medical advisor, holding absolutely no ownership rights. I clutched the papers to my chest, my throat tight. Until the very end, my father hadn't forgotten the poor, hadn't forgotten his loyal staff, and above all, hadn't forgotten to protect his daughter from a man he had already begun to suspect. I stuffed the documents into my uniform jacket and used my phone to snap quick. Photos of every page, sending them to Philip. His message popped up immediately. Get out now. An unmarked car just pulled up outside. My heart lurched. I quickly grabbed the envelope with my name on it, but before I could open it, the sound of a key turning in the front door echoed through the house. I stood dead still. Who else had a key to this house? A woman's sharp, cold voice rang out. Check the study first. Thomas said if Arthur hid the real will, it would only be here. I instantly recognized Victoria's voice. I looked around. The study had no back exit, only a small storage cupboard next to the bookshelves. I ducked inside, pulling the door shut but leaving a tiny crack to breathe. My heart hammered so loudly I was terrified the people outside could hear it. Through the crack, I saw Victoria walk in, wearing a beige skirt suit, her hair in a neat bun. Behind her were two men wearing doctor's scrubs. Seeing them walk into my father's house dressed like doctors, yet acting like common thieves, sent a wave of indescribable disgust through me. Victoria walked straight to where the family portrait had been taken down. She looked at the empty secret compartment, and her face fell. Someone beat us too. It. One of the men asked, could it be Madeline? Victoria whipped around, her voice dropping viciously. If it's her, we absolutely cannot let her leave the city. Thomas made it clear. The longer she lives, the quicker we all die. That sentence chilled me to the bone. I held my breath, rummaging blindly through my cleaning bucket. Inside were a bottle of glass cleaner spray, a cloth, and a small screwdriver. The most mundane items had suddenly become my final weapons. One man began tearing through the bookshelves, while the other walked toward the plowed storage cupboard. His hand touched the doorknob. I gripped the spray bottle tightly. Outside, Victoria spoke into her phone. Thomas, the safe is empty. I think Madeline is still close by. Thomas's voice sounded faintly from the phone speaker, but I caught a few words. Search properly. If you find her, bring her straight to the hospital. Try not to bruise her too much. We still need to use her tomorrow. I almost choked on a sob. A husband speaking about his wife as if she were a piece of medical equipment that needed preserving before use. In that exact second, the very last shred of softness I held for Thomas withered and died. Completely. The cupboard door swung open. The man poked his head in. I sprayed the chemical glass cleaner directly into his eyes. He screamed and stumbled back, crashing into a bookshelf. I burst out, shoved the heavy filing cabinet so that stacks of paper tumbled down to block their path, and bolted for the side door. Victoria screamed behind me, grab her. I didn't look back. My legs still throbbed from the night before, but the sheer terror of being dragged back to the operating table made me run faster than I'd ever had in my life. Bursting into the back garden, I vaulted over the low fence, into the neighbor's property. My uniform snagged and tore, but on the other side was a house undergoing renovations, the air thick with cement dust. I heard the man pursuing me, heard Victoria cursing viciously in the distance. As I dashed out into the back alley, a motorcycle screeched to a halt. The rider was Philip. He handed me a helmet, his voice urgent but steady. Get on. I scrambled on, and before I was even fully seated, he gunned the engine. Behind us, the two men sprinted to the mouth of the alley, but were blocked by a stream of traffic. I clutched the document bag to my chest, my other hand wrapping tightly around Philip's waist. It was the first time since I'd known him that I was this close. His shirt was damp with sweat. His hands gripped the handlebars with absolute certainty. I didn't say, don't be scared. But as he weaved through the dense London traffic, on the main road, he slightly leaned his body to shield me from the wind, as if terrified that even the slightest scrape might shatter me. After riding a long way, he finally asked, "Are you hurt?" I panted. "No. Just ruined my image as a professional cleaner." Philip stayed quiet for a second, then replied, "It's fine, you just outran 3 people. Occupational standards can be flexible." I laughed, a little more genuinely this time, but after a few seconds, tears began to stream down my face. I buried my forehead against his back, trying not to make a sound. He definitely felt it, because the bike slowed down just a fraction, but he didn't turn around, nor did he ask questions. There are people who comfort you by simply letting you cry. without forcing you to explain why. When we returned to the safe house, I finally opened the envelope my father had left. Inside was only an old photograph of him and me outside the Arthur Pharmaceuticals building and a handwritten note. The handwriting was shaky. He must have been very tired when he wrote it. Maddie, if the day comes when you have to walk through the darkest place alone, I want you to remember, you are not weak just because you trusted the wrong person. Trusting others is a decent instinct. The true measure of strength is knowing how to stand back up after being betrayed. I held the note to my chest, weeping until I had no strength left. Suddenly, my burner phone vibrated in the silent room. A voice message from an unknown number. I put it on speaker. Nurse Lily's voice filled the air, faint, breathless, and terrified. Miss Madeline, it's Lily. I'm so sorry I didn't call sooner. Don't go back to the hospital. And don't believe your surgery paperwork. They don't just want your money, they want your heart. The voice message ended with a harsh, sharp cracking sound, like a phone being snatched away and smashed against a tiled floor. I sat completely frozen in the middle of the living room, still holding the Praxis phone. That final sentence kept drilling into my ears, refusing to fade. They don't just want your money, they want your heart. There are phrases in life that your brain can't immediately process, but your body reacts to before logic kicks in. My hands turned to ice, my back was drenched in cold sweat, and my throat felt as if I had swallowed glass. I was prepared for Thomas wanting the company, wanting the money, wanting to frame me as insane to legalize his theft. But I never ever imagined that the very heart beating in my chest had been put on the market with a price tag. Philip snatched the phone from my hand, replaying the message. His expression grew darker with every second. David stood by the window, listening while staring down at the street below, a habit of a man always expecting a tale. When Lily's voice cut off, the room fell so silent I could clearly hear the fridge humming in the kitchen corner. I asked very quietly, "What does my heart mean?" Philip didn't answer immediately. He plugged the phone into his laptop to check the attached data files in the message. There was a compressed image file. It was small, but it opened agonizingly slowly. In those few seconds, I felt like I was standing in front of theater doors, knowing the truth lay behind them, yet desperately wanting to turn and run. The screen finally displayed an internal surgical schedule. Small text, lots of medical jargon, but one section made my vision go black. Heart transplant, Theater 3, scheduled time, tomorrow morning, the exact time I was supposed to be on Thomas's operating table. Recipient, female patient, listed under a foreign code. Donor, blank, but there was a blood match code that exactly matched my medical files. I stared at that string of numbers for a long time. When I was young, my father taught me how to read batch numbers, medical codes, and compliance files, telling me that in the pharmaceutical industry, the truth often wasn't in what people said, but in the numbers they assumed no one would notice. Now, those very numbers were telling me that my body had been carved up and allocated in a clinical, cold-blooded plan, legitimized by white coats. I took a step back, my lower back hitting the edge of the table. Philip instantly reached out and caught my elbow. This time, he didn't let go. Immediately, probably because he could feel me violently shaking. He called my name, his voice very low. "Madeline, look at me." I looked up. His eyes were slightly red from staying awake all night, his jaw covered in stubble, his shirt wrinkled at the shoulder. He looked nothing like the immaculate solicitor who usually stood in boardrooms. Yet, in that raw exhaustion, I found comfort. He spoke slowly. "Breathe. Your heart is still here. As long as it beats, they haven't won." Such a simple sentence, yet it made my tears spill over. I placed my hand over my left breast. Beneath my palm, my heartbeat was fast and erratic, but every thud against my ribs was a loud, clear reminder. It reminded me that no matter if they had written my name on a theater schedule, prepared the anesthesia, or calculated the monetary value of this organ, it still belonged to me. David stepped forward, pointing at the recipient code. "This isn't an ordinary patient. I've heard this alias before in another case. It's likely the daughter of a foreign oligarch, lying low in a private clinic. If that's true, this isn't just murder for inheritance. This is tied to an organ trafficking ring." I turned to look at him. In a massive private hospital in the middle of London? They dare? David gave a bitter, joyless smile. Crime isn't afraid of a brightly lit city. Miss Madeline, it's only afraid of someone flipping the right switch. Philip opened the other files Lily had sent. There were photos of falsified injury reports and a list of on-call surgical staff containing both Thomas and Victoria. There was also a note, slightly blurry but legible. Ensure the donor experiences no myocardial damage prior to extraction. I slumped into a chair, feeling nauseous and dizzy. Thomas used to place his hand on my chest and say, "Listening to your heartbeat puts my mind at ease." I thought it was an expression of love. It turns out he was just inspecting the merchandise to ensure it was still usable. Philip's phone rang. He answered it, listening for almost a minute without speaking before looking at me. My team just ran through the hospital's records. For the last 3 years, there are at least 6 cases of organ donation, post-accident that show anomalies. The donors were all healthy prior, and the families swear they never signed consent forms. Victoria Hale was on shift for every single one. David slapped the table. That confirms it. Thomas is the surgeon, Victoria handles the anesthesia and the paperwork, and someone outside finds the buyers, launders the money, and pays the bribes. The man pulling the strings is probably William Davies. In the underworld, they call him Clean Will because he does the dirtiest jobs, but his record is spotless. I looked at the men in the room. The name William Davies meant nothing to me, but what he represented was terrifyingly clear. To them, a human life was just a file. A heart was just supply. A marriage was just a beautiful disguise to drag me onto the operating table without arousing suspicion. I wiped my tears and sat up straight. I'm not hiding anymore. Philip frowned instantly. Madeline, you just found out you're the target of an entire syndicate. Showing yourself too early is suicide. Is it more suicidal than letting Thomas tell the whole country that I'm insane? I looked at him, my voice raspy but firm. If I keep hiding, people will only hear his voice. He's a doctor. He's my husband. He signed the files. I am just a patient who ran away. From the very beginning of this chess game, he positioned himself on higher ground. Philip remained silent. I knew he didn't want me to expose myself because he genuinely cared about my safety, but I also knew he understood I was right. Against people who use the media to gag their victims, silence is no longer safety. Silence is just a slower death. We decided to record a short video. No crying. No long, rambling sob story. No. Exploiting my pain to beg for pity. Philip helped me draft the key points, while David checked the camera angle and set up secure transfer links to several Biclée d'Edo, trusted investigative journalists. I changed into a crisp white blouse and tied my hair back. My face was still pale, my eyes still swollen, but when I looked into the camera lens, the woman staring back wasn't the trembling patient from the hospital bed. I looked straight down the lens and spoke. My name is Madeline Arthur, the legal heir to Arthur Pharmaceuticals. I have never authorized my husband, Dr. Thomas Bennett, to manage my personal assets or act as proxy for the company. Any claims that I lack mental capacity, am suffering from paranoia, or require compulsory psychiatric sectioning are entirely false. I paused for a second, taking a deep breath to stop my voice from cracking. I am currently gathering evidence regarding the falsification of my medical placenta records, and evidence that my medication, as well as my late father's medication, was fatally tampered with. Furthermore, the heart surgery scheduled for me involves severe irregularities. I am requesting the authorities, the BROSA's, board of directors, and all relevant bodies to establish an independent investigation. If anything happens to me following this video, please begin your inquiries with the people who signed my surgical approval forms. When I finished the last sentence, my hands were ice cold. Philip turned off the camera and looked at me for a long time. He didn't interject. He didn't offer empty comforts. He just said loudly and clearly, Arthur would have nodded in approval. I looked down, nearly crying again, but this time I held the tears back. The video was dispatched as evening fell. Within an hour, several news outlets picked it up. Public opinion, which had been lapping up the story of the missing mentally ill wife spun by Thomas, suddenly pivoted. Some people still insulted me, calling it rich people drama. Some questioned how a critically ill patient could escape, but the first wave of comments demanding the hospital be investigated began to surface. My burner phone rang. It was Thomas's number. I stared at the screen, a bizarre sensation washing over my chest. Just yesterday, seeing his name would have made me soften, used to being comforted by him. Now, that name only brought to mind the glaring lights of Theater 3. Philip shot me a look asking if I wanted to answer. I nodded and put it on. Speaker. Thomas's voice came through, still so gentle it made my skin crawl. Maddie, where are you? I saw the video. Please don't let people use you. You're ill. You're frightened. It's normal to imagine things. Come back to me. I won't be angry. I stared straight at the black screen of the phone and asked, do you want me? Back to cure me or to cut my heart out? The line went dead silent for a few seconds. Very briefly, but long enough for me to know I had hit the mark. When Thomas spoke again, his voice was no longer soft. It was still controlled, but beneath it lay a freezing cruelty I had never clearly heard before. You're cleverer than I thought, but Maddie, don't forget that legally you are still my wife. A wife with severe heart disease and documented psychological disorders who abandoned her treatment. Do you really think a little video will save you? Philip clenched his fists. I, however, felt a strange, profound calm. I replied, no, the video won't save me, but it ensures that if I die, my death will no longer look natural. Thomas let out a low chuckle. That laugh reminded me of our wedding night when he had unpinned my hair and said, from now on, I will be your home. I used to believe a home was a place you return to. Now I understood that some homes are built as traps. He said, keep playing your game then. I'm quite curious to see how much you really learned from your father. The call ended. The room sank into silence. Philip walked over, shut the blinds, and checked the locks. David muttered. The blokes dropped the husband of the year act. The monster is showing its face. Philip pulled a stack of papers from his briefcase. Madeline, these are divorce papers, alongside an injunction blocking his guardianship proxy. I prepared them this afternoon but waited until you were calmer to show you. I stared at the words petition for divorce on the front page. A 5-year marriage, ultimately reduced to a few sheets of paper waiting for a signature. On my wedding day, I had signed the register with hands trembling from Lacio. Happiness. Now, I used the same hands to sign a divorce petition just to stay alive. As I put the pen down, I noticed a long gash on the back of Philip's hand. He must have caught it on the fence when pulling me away from the old house. The blood had dried into a dark line. I stood up and fetched the first aid kit from the cupboard. Philip looked surprised when I grabbed his hand. Leave it. It's just a scratch. If you argue with me, I'll add a clause in our contract stating my solicitor refuses medical cooperation, I said. Philip looked at me, eventually surrendering in silence. I dabbed antiseptic on the cut. He winced slightly but didn't pull his hand away. It was a tiny, mundane moment, entirely out of place in a life-or-death manhunt. But because of that, it softened my heart. After enduring so much fake tenderness, seeing a real wound on the hand of a man standing by my side felt infinitely more precious than all the bouquets Thomas had ever bought me. I whispered, thank you for believing me. Philip looked down at my hand holding his. His voice was lower than usual. I don't just believe you. I want you to survive so you can say everything that needs to be said yourself. I looked up. His eyes held something unspoken, but he kept it firmly behind a professional boundary. Perhaps because I was still legally someone else's wife. Or perhaps he knew that right now I needed protection far more than I needed a confession of love. That very respect made my heart ache in a completely different way. Night fell completely. We spent it preparing for the board of directors meeting. The next day, Philip meticulously organized the evidence into folders. David stepped outside to take a call, returning with a grim expression. Bad news. Thomas just leaked your psychiatric evaluation to several key shareholders. 3 doctors signed off, claiming you suffer from persecution, complex emotional instability, and pose a danger to yourself. Tomorrow in the boardroom, he'll absolutely use that to crush you. I looked at the freshly signed divorce papers on the table. My body was exhausted beyond measure, but a strange, fierce fire had ignited inside me. I used to think pain made people weak. But perhaps, when backed into a corner, pain forged itself into something much sharper than tears. I picked up my father's toxicology report, the real will, the USB, and the surgical schedule bearing my blood code. I looked at Philip and said, "Tomorrow morning, I will walk into that boardroom. If they want to call me a madwoman, I will show them a madwoman who remembers every number, every signature, and every drop of her father's blood." Philip looked at me and gave a single, firm nod. Outside the window, London was still glittering with lights, and I knew that from this moment on, I wasn't just running to survive. I was turning back to reclaim the right to own my own heart. The next morning, I stood in front of the Arthur Pharmaceuticals headquarters in Canary Wharf, looking up at the 38th floor where my father had spent half his life building an empire. When I was little, my father would hold my hand in the private lift, greeting every receptionist and security guard by name. He would bend down and tell me that a company wasn't just a shiny logo and profit margins. It was the ferries into any accessed livelihood of hundreds of families. Back then, I just liked looking at the city from up high. Today, walking into this building to fight the husband trying to murder me, I finally understood how heavy every step my father took truly was. Philip walked beside me, holding a briefcase, his white shirt impeccably crisp, as if he hadn't been awake until dawn. Only the dark circles under his eyes and the small plaster on his hand betrayed his exhaustion. David walked slightly ahead, playing the role of a temporary bodyguard, though as soon as he entered the lobby, his eyes darted around like a man expecting an ambush. The lift shot upwards. I listened to my own heartbeat. I didn't hate its erratic rhythm anymore. It was proof that I was still alive to be here. The large boardroom on the 38th floor was nearly full. Board members sat along the long oak table. Some looked at me with genuine concern. Some averted their eyes, and some couldn't hide their suspicion. The news over the last few days had turned me into a walking liability in their eyes. Was I the victimized heir? Or a sick, delusional woman tearing the company apart after her father's death? I walked to the head of the table, to the chair my father used to occupy. It was the same old black leather chair, a small scratch on the right armrest where my mother's wedding ring had caught it years ago. I placed my hand on the backrest, my nose stinging, but I didn't sit down immediately. I looked around the room, greeting them by name just as my father did. "Hello, Charles." "Good morning, Sarah." "Hello, Richard." "Thank you all for coming." A few gazes softened. I knew I didn't have the advantage of health or public opinion, but I had one thing Thomas could never fake: true memories with this company. I remembered the people who had walked alongside my father, remembered how they took their tea, how they argued in meetings, how they used to pick me up when I ran around the office as a child. The boardroom doors opened again. Thomas walked in. He wore a dark navy suit, his hair perfectly styled, his wire-rimmed glasses giving him the calm, collected aura of a man who had suffered sleepless nights worrying about his Torties lease. Wife. If I didn't know the truth, I might have felt sorry for the faint dark circles and the perfectly calibrated exhaustion on his face. He walked towards me, his voice deep and pained. "Maddie, you're still weak. Why? Didn't you let me bring you here? I told you, company business can wait. Your health is the priority." Several board members exchanged glances. It was a masterfully manipulative line. It established him as the caring husband while implicitly reminding everyone that I was a sick woman. I watched his hand reach out, intending to touch my shoulder. I stepped back, half a pace. "Dr. Bennett," I said, enunciating every syllable. "Today is a board of directors meeting for Arthur Pharmaceuticals. Please take your seat in the guest section." His smile froze for a microsecond. He pulled his hand back, the look behind his glasses flashing cold before softening again. He walked to the far end of the Clarity and the 7 table and sat down, playing the part of a patient man tolerating his hysterical wife. That fake endurance made me sick, but I refused to let emotion hijack me. Philip stood next to me and activated the projector. My shareholding documents and inheritance rights appeared on the large screen. I began to speak. My voice was raspy at first, but grew steadier with every word. "According to the Articles of Association, I am the majority shareholder. Following the passing of my father, Mr. Arthur, I have the right to convene this emergency meeting. There is only one item on the agenda, the immediate suspension of all representative, advisory, and unofficial executive powers held by Dr. Thomas Bennett at Arthur Pharmaceuticals. The room erupted into murmurs. Charles, an older board member who had been with my father since the early days, frowned. Madeline, with all due respect, you've been through a lot. Thomas has helped the company immensely over the past few months. Whatever marital disputes you have, keep them behind closed doors. Don't let it damage the firm. I looked at him, my voice softening. Charles, it is precisely because I don't want the firm damaged that I am standing here. If this were merely a marital dispute, I wouldn't drag it into the boardroom. I clicked to the next slide. 3 offshore transfer records from the past 3 months appeared. These are 3 transactions moving a total of £1.5 million, from company accounts to an offshore shell entity. The approver listed is me. However, on all 3 of these dates, I was hospitalized on an IV drip and did not use my electronic signature. Philip handed out copies of the documents. The room fell silent. Richard, a younger board member, scrutinized the papers and asked, Dr. Bennett, do you know anything about these transfers? Thomas sighed, acting deeply wounded. Madeline was ill, so I assisted in NICU of processing many tasks under her instruction. All procedures have valid signatures. If she doesn't remember authorizing them now, I don't blame her. That doesn't remember was a poison needle. I clicked to the next slide. My father's real will appeared alongside the forged version Thomas had circulated. To key shareholders. This is the original will left by my father. Dr. Bennett holds absolutely no shares. The version Dr. Bennett has been using contains entirely different clauses and the signature shows clear signs of forgery. Charles held the paper, his hands trembling. I saw his unwavering support waver, but Thomas still hadn't lost his composure. He pulled a file from his briefcase and stood up slowly. I never wanted to make this public in front of everyone, Thomas said, his voice dripping with such fabricated sorrow that a few people looked down. But, for Madeline's safety, and the company's, I have no choice. This is a diagnostic file from 3 independent psychiatrists. Following the loss of her father, Madeline has exhibited severe persecution, paranoia, emotional instability, and believes her loved ones are trying to kill her. The documents she is presenting may have been manipulated by others, or she is entirely misinterpreting them through the lens of her illness. A stack of papers was passed around the table. The atmosphere shifted violently. I saw people looking at me with pity, others averting their eyes as if avoiding a volatile hazard. In this society, the moment a woman is branded unstable, everything she says is instantly devalued. And when that label is applied by her husband, a respected doctor, it becomes an iron chain. Thomas looked at me, his voice impossibly gentle. Maddie, I know you're terrified. I'm not angry, but don't let outsiders use you to fight me. You need treatment. I stared at him, suddenly recalling the night in the hospital when he told me I needed sleep. All those words that sounded like care were, in reality, just different ways of telling me to shut up. I glanced at Philip. He didn't speak, just gave a subtle nod. I pressed play on the audio file from Dr. King's USB. Thomas's voice echoed through the boardroom, so crisp and clear that no one could pretend not to hear it. If the old man doesn't die, we can't touch Madeline's shares. Charles, just do your part, and your daughter will be safe. Then came Victoria's voice. The dose has been increased. The heart failure will look natural as long as the files are scrubbed. The boardroom was dead silent. Someone dropped a pen onto the table. The tiny clatter sounded like a gunshot. Thomas shot to his feet. This audio is spliced. Do not let a sick woman manipulate your emotions. With today's AI technology, anyone's voice can be faked. Philip stepped forward, his tone serene. That recording has already been submitted to an independent forensics unit. Furthermore, we possess the toxicology report on Mr. Arthur's medication, conducted by Dr. Henry Lawson, prior to Mr. Arthur's death, along with the preserved original samples. I placed the toxicology report on the table. The medication my father took contained toxins that induce arrhythmia and heart failure. That exact same drug also appeared in my treatment protocol after I was diagnosed with a heart condition. Sarah, A female board member looked at Thomas, her voice shaking. Thomas, what is the meaning of this? Thomas fell silent. For the first time during the meeting, I saw his hands clench into fists under the edge of the table. But he still had one last card to layer in. Play. He pushed up his glasses and gave a very slight smile. I didn't expect you to prepare so thoroughly, Maddie. But you're forgetting something. Your medical files were verified by an entire medical board. You really do have a severe heart condition. You really do need surgery. The fact that you are terrified and hallucinating a conspiracy to steal your heart only proves how severe your pathology has become. I stared at him. Then please explain this. The screen switched to the video Lily had sent. The footage was shaky, secretly, filmed through the gap of the pharmacy door, but it clearly showed Thomas and Victoria swapping labels on vials of medication. Philip zoomed in on the batch. Number of the vial, placing it next to the batch number from my father's medical file. The numbers were a perfect match. Uproar erupted in the boardroom. Thomas turned visibly pale. He pointed at the Rober A screen. That is illegally obtained covert footage. It holds no legal weight. Philip retorted instantly. Nurse Lily Norton is an internal employee who discovered malpractice. She qualifies as a whistleblower. As of this morning, copies of this video and the medication samples have been submitted to the Quoto and Anaber A Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA, and the police. Its legal weight will be determined by the authorities, not by you. That shut Thomas up. I looked at him, feeling the image of the perfect man I once loved peeling away strip by strip. Without the warm lighting, without the Combler Armain hospital bed, without me lying weakly for him to comfort, he was reduced to a talspote, greedy cornered rat. I stood taller and addressed the board. I motioned for a vote to immediately suspend all of Dr. Thomas Bennett's direct and indirect powers at Arthur. Pharmaceuticals. All financial records, pharmaceutical logs, and wills are to be handed over to the police. I also demand my full executive powers be reinstated. Pending the official investigation. No one spoke immediately. The prolonged silence made my heart ache. Then, Charles slowly raised his hand. I'm so sorry, Madeline. I should have placed my faith in Arthur's daughter. Then Sarah raised her hand. Then Richard. Then one by one, every hand in the live room went up. Not a rushed wave, but a deliberate, solid confirmation. Seeing that, my eyes grew hot, not because I had won, but because in this room that once belonged to my father, the truth still had a place. The motion was passed. Thomas sat completely still for a few seconds, then he had a laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was so chilling that the room went dead. Silent again. He stood up, adjusted his cuffs as if he had just finished a routine budget meeting. Do you really think a few recordings and blurry videos can end this? He looked around the room, his eyes finally locking onto me. Maddie, you truly are your father's daughter, just as stubborn. I gripped the edge of the table as he mentioned my father. Thomas stepped closer. Philip instantly moved to block him, but Thomas just leaned in, speaking softly enough for only me to hear. Do you know what your father said before he died? He grabbed my hand and begged, please let her go. Pity he was begging the wrong man. The blood in my veins turned to ice. For a split second, I genuinely wanted to lunge at him and tear that smug face apart. But Philip placed his hand on my seat, arm applying just enough pressure to anchor me. His voice rang out, colder than I had ever heard it. Dr. Bennett, I suggest you leave this room before I call security and draft an NET. Injunction for threatening the majority shareholder of this company. Thomas looked at Philip, his lips curling into a sneer. Solicitor Knight is awfully eager. I wonder if it's for the client or for personal reasons. Philip didn't reply. I saw his knuckles turn white, but his voice remained. Deadpan. The door is behind you. Thomas looked at me one last time, his face softening back into the expression of the husband reminding his wife to take her pills. Make sure you eat properly, Maddie. Your heart is very precious. Don't let it get damaged before the real show begins. He turned and walked out, the sound of his leather shoes echoing against the blows. Marble floor beat a methodical rhythm. When the boardroom doors clicked shut, I finally realized my back was drenched. In sweat, the board members slowly filed out. Some apologized, others looked as though they wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. I didn't blame them. When confronted with an atrocity so vile, people need time to process that it's actually real. I just felt exhausted. Exhausted to the point that my legs no longer felt like my own. Philip helped me sit down in my father's chair. It was the first time I had sat there without him standing beside me. I used to be intimidated by this position because it felt too vast. I was still scared, but that fear no longer made me want to run away. David pushed the door open and strode in, his face tense. "We have a problem." Philip looked up. "What is it?" "Lily is missing. My contact checked the hospital. She's not on the ward and the corridor CCTV has been wiped for a 10-minute window." David looked at me, his voice dropping low. "Before she vanished, she sent a text to your burner phone." I instantly opened my phone. A new message glowed on the screen from an unknown number, but reading just one line told me it was about Lily. "If you want to save Nurse Lily, come to Theater 3 before midnight. Alone, if you call the police, she dies first." I sat frozen, staring at the text. The boardroom on the 38th floor was brightly lit. Outside, London was bustling through its lunchtime rush as if nothing had happened. But in my ears, the beeping of the heart monitor from the night before played on a loop. Lily had saved my life with a scrap of paper. Now, they were using her life to drag me back to the place where I was supposed to have died. Philip took the phone from my hand. After reading it, his face turned to stone. He said immediately, "It's a trap. You cannot go." I looked up at him. "I know it's a trap." "You know, and you still want to go?" His voice dropped. He wasn't yelling, but the weight in his tone made it obvious how hard he was struggling to keep his composure. "Maddie, they just lost the board vote. Thomas has no clean way out left, so he's using Lily to drag you back to the hospital. If you show up there, he can fabricate any scenario. You had an episode, you committed suicide, you attacked someone, or you simply vanished in the operating theater." I stood up, planting both hands on the table to stop myself from shaking. "And if I don't go and Lily dies? What then? That girl saved me. She isn't family. She doesn't owe me a single penny, yet she still wrote that note while terrified. Out of her mind. Are you telling me to abandon her just because it's dangerous?" Philip stared at me for a long time. In his eyes was a sharp pain that he refused to vocalize. David, leaning against the doorframe, crossed his arms and offered a more practical take. "If you're going, you're going. But nobody is stupid enough to go alone like the kidnapper demanded. They want you alone because they're afraid of witnesses. So, we give them fewer witnesses to see, but ensure the right people are watching." Philip turned to him. "You have a plan?" David shrugged. "A plan? Maybe not. Experience walking into ambushes? Plenty. Theater 3 is in the old surgical wing at the back of the hospital, right? I'll get someone to pull the blueprints for the power grid and CCTV. As for you, solicitor, contact the police through your clean channels. Don't use 999. Give them the dossier you just presented to the board. With that, they can't ignore it." I looked at Philip. He still didn't want me to go, but he knew I wouldn't back down. Finally, he exhaled, his voice raspy with fatigue. "If we do this, you follow my and David's instructions to the letter. Do not charge in, do not try to negotiate with Thomas. Do not trust anyone in scrubs, even if they are crying. In front of you." I nodded. Philip was about to say something else when his phone rang. He answered it, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling window. I saw his reflection. Against the London skyline, solitary and wound as tight as a violin string. A man who was always so calm could no longer hide his anxiety, and yet it made my her heart feel warmer. At least in this world, there was someone terrified of me, dying not because of assets or shares, but simply because I was me. We left the Arthur Pharmaceuticals building as evening approached. David drove me back to the Croydon safe house to change clothes. He prepared a baggy coat, flat shoes, and a small tracking phone sewn into the lining of my pocket. Philip stood by the table, checking an audio transmitter, before handing me a delicate silver bracelet. I looked at it in surprise. "You have the mood to gift jewelry at a time like this?" Philip paused, then answered with such deadpan sincerity I almost laughed. "It's a GPS tracker. But if you want to view it as jewelry, feel free. Just don't. Take it off." I slipped the bracelet onto my wrist. The cool metal hugged my skin. Perhaps, if all this were happening in a normal life, a man handing a woman a bracelet would that be a very different moment. There would be shyness, awkwardness, maybe even a promise. But for us, amidst a deadly pursuit involving my husband and an organ trafficking syndicate, romance was simply him finding a way to ensure he knew I was still breathing. Before we left, Philip gently caught my wrist, very lightly, just enough to make me stop. He said, "Maddie, if things go south, you run. Lily needs saving, but you need to live. Don't think your life is worth any less just because someone else sacrificed themselves for you." I looked at his hand on my wrist. His words weren't sweet. They weren't like the things Thomas used to say, but they touched something deep inside me. Thomas always told me to listen to him so he could protect me. Philip was telling me to survive by making my own choices. I whispered, "I know. I haven't taken back my father's company completely. I haven't divorced him, and I haven't scolded you enough for being so dry. I'm not dying yet." Philip looked at me and finally gave a faint smile. "Good. You can scold me. Later. Just make sure you come back." Night fell rapidly. The private hospital in Kensington was brilliantly brilliant, illuminated, resembling a massive, luxurious glass box. Looking from the Place, outside, no one would believe it concealed such filthy secrets. I entered, through the laundry delivery bay following David's instructions. And inside, Contact had smuggled us a temporary access card. As I walked down the corridor leading to the old surgical wing, the familiar smell of antiseptic assaulted my nose, making my stomach cramp. I had been a patient here. I used to believe this place saved lives. Now, every white coat that glided past made me wonder, are they carrying medicine to cure, or drugs to silence? Perhaps the greatest fear isn't the fear of death, but the fear of no longer knowing which hand is reaching out to save you, and which is pushing you into the abyss. David's voice crackled softly in the earpiece hidden in my ear. "You're on the right path. The CCTV on this corridor has been looped for 3 minutes. But don't stroll, I'm not a wizard." I lowered my voice. "If you talked less, I'd probably walk faster." "Fair enough. Still got a sense of humor. Good sign." I followed the directions until I neared Theater 3. The corridor was unnaturally deserted. The harsh white lights bounced off the polished floors, making everything feel cold and artificial, like a nightmare. Through the small viewing window on the prep room door, I saw Lily. She was strapped to a metal chair, a strip of duct tape over her mouth, her hair matted to her sweaty face. Standing next to her was Victoria Hale, holding a syringe, looking as serene as if she were prepping a patient for a routine tonsillectomy. Seeing that made my blood boil. A woman in medical scrubs could use beautiful placeplays, clinical jargon, but when she held a needle to murder someone to silence them, that white coat couldn't hide the filth. Victoria turned to Lily, her voice slow and deliberate. "You're still young. It's a shame, but who told you to play the hero? People like you should just clock in, take your salary, and ignore things you shouldn't see. You would have lived a quiet life." Lily shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her cheeks. I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms. Philip's voice whispered urgently in my ear, "Maddie, stay calm. The police are entering through the back gates. Do not go in yet." I understood, but understanding doesn't make it easy to stand still. Victoria was stepping towards Lily, needle raised. I checked my watch. In less than a few seconds, she would plunge that needle into Lily's vein. I couldn't wait. I shoved the doors open and stormed in. Victoria froze, her eyes widening before she let out a cold sneer. "Madeline, you really are a loyal friend. No wonder Thomas didn't mind marrying you. At the very least, you're predictable." I stood a few paces away, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Let Lily go. My issues with Thomas have nothing to do with her." "Nothing to do with her?" Victoria laughed softly, her gaze as sharp as a prosed. "Scalpel. This little girl ruined a procedure we've been prepping for months. Do you have any idea how much that procedure is worth? A healthy heart, rare blood, type, near-perfect compatibility index. Madeline, you were born with everything. Even in death, you make people jealous." I looked at the woman in front of me and suddenly felt more pity than anger. Victoria used to love Thomas. She was highly educated and could have been a decent doctor. Yet here she was, using jealousy and ambition to justify sheer evil. Some people don't turn wicked because they lack love. They turn wicked because they believe that if they can't have what they want, no one else deserves to live in peace. I said slowly, "You're jealous because Thomas married me. But do you know what? The most pathetic part is, he doesn't love you either. He just needed you the way he needs a key to open the operating theater." Victoria's face drained of color. She raised the syringe. "Shut your mouth." Just then, the back doors burst open. Two plainclothes police officers and David's men swarmed in. Victoria reacted instinctively, lunging to inject Lily. But I threw myself forward and slapped her arm away. The syringe hit the tiled floor and shattered. Victoria screamed, thrashing as an officer pinned her to the ground. Her manicured nails scratched deeply across my neck. Lily's tape was ripped off. She gasped for air, sobbing, "Miss Madeline, get out!" "Thomas is still." Before Lily could finish, the theater phone rang. A police officer picked it up, but no one spoke on the other end. Simultaneously, my burner phone vibrated. It was Thomas. I put it on speaker. His voice came through no longer gentle but brutally cold. "You're better than I thought," saved a nurse. "Do you feel like you've won?" I stared at Victoria being handcuffed and replied, "At least I didn't let her die like you wanted." Thomas chuckled softly. "You've always been so sentimental over worthless people. Let me ask you this. Between a poor nurse you've already saved and the solicitor who's been standing behind you these past few days, who do you want? To save more?" My heart felt like it was crushed in a vice. I whipped around to look at David. He turned pale, instantly dialing Philip's number. No answer. My phone pinged with an image. It showed Philip tied to a chair, his hands bound. Behind his back, blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, his white shirt, crumpled and dirty. Standing next to him was a man holding a knife, his face half hidden in the shadows. Thomas continued, his voice dipping into venomous sweetness. "Your solicitor is very clever, but sometimes being too clever makes people angry. Make your clever choice, Maddie. The nurse you've already rescued, or the man who's been protecting you?" I stood frozen in the operating theater. Lily sobbed uncontrollably. "Don't. Listen to him, Miss Madeline. Don't do it for me." I couldn't hear her clearly anymore. My mind was consumed by the image of Philip, looking at me before I left, saying, "Make sure you come back." I was so used to Thomas using the people I loved to threaten me. My father, his company, Lily. And now Philip. He knew me. Or rather, he knew exactly where to twist the knife. But this time, I couldn't let emotion march me into a trap. I looked at David. He signaled that his tech guy was tracing the photos' location metadata. I took a deep breath to stop my voice from breaking. "What do you want?" Thomas answered immediately. "Tonight, you drop everything. Withdraw your police reports and come alone to the address I send you. If you bring anyone, Philip, Dees." I was about to speak when Lily suddenly grabbed my sleeve. Trembling, she pulled a tiny USB drive hidden in the lining of her hospital gown. Her voice was weak, but clear. "I have a recording. I overheard Dr. Bennett and Dr. Hale," he said. "Your heart had to be kept pristine." And he mentioned the name of the boss. I took the tiny device, my palms freezing. David leaned in, whispering, "With this, we can force the police and the press to blow the doors off this operation. But we need to find Philip now." Thomas was still waiting on the line. I stared at the black screen and spoke, very slowly. "Thomas, you lost on one front you will never understand." He scoffed. "What front?" "Good people don't just know how to sacrifice themselves. They also know how to leave a way out for each other to survive." I hung up before he could respond. David immediately ordered his contact to leak the theater video, the news of Lily's rescue, and a snippet of the audio to the investigative journalists waiting on standby. Less than 10 minutes later, news portals began breaking the story. A Kensington private hospital had held a nurse hostage in Theater 3, linked to an illegal heart transplant ring. Victoria Hale's name hit the headlines. The image of her holding the syringe was blurred, but anyone in the medical community would recognize her. David took a call, his face tight. He opened a map on his phone. The metadata puts Philip at an abandoned scrapyard near Dartford. But there's something else. The GPS signal on your bracelet went dark in that exact area during the recon phase. Thomas's men might have taken the surveillance team too. I looked at Lily. Someone had thrown a coat over her. She was pale, but her eyes held a bizarre, unyielding strength. She grabbed my hand and articulated every word. I'm going with you. Absolutely not. You nearly died. Lily shook her head, her lips trembling but resolute. I know where the blue USB is hidden. Mr. Arthur gave it to Dr. King, and Dr. King passed it to me because he was terrified his flat would be searched. It has the list of the anomalous deaths. If we don't get it, saving me today means nothing. I stared at the young woman in front of me, someone so terrified she had burst into tears, yet refused to run away from the truth. Perhaps courage isn't the absence of trembling. Courage is trembling violently and still taking the next step. The abandoned scrapyard in Dartford sat hidden behind a muddy dirt track, flanked by weeds and rusted shipping containers stacked like dark tumors in the drosted night. As soon as the car stopped at the edge of the road, I heard dogs barking. In the distance, the clatter of loose corrugated iron blowing in the wind, and the sound of Lily suppressing a groan of pain beside me. She was still incredibly weak, her wrists bruised from the ropes, but the hand, clutching the phone with the audio recordings, gripped it as tightly as if it were a piece of her own soul. David turned off the headlights and looked back at us. From here on out, nobody wanders off. Madeline in the middle, Lily close behind. If something happens, get down before you ask why. Lily swallowed hard. And after we get down, David gave her a look. Pray I'm still standing. In any other context, that would have made me laugh. But right now, my throat was bone dry. Philip was somewhere in this scrapyard. He could be beaten, used as bait, or maybe it was just an old photo sent to lure me here. The most terrifying part was not knowing how much control Thomas still had, or if the real mastermind had stepped out from the shadows. We picked our way through the narrow gaps between rusted HGVs. The smell of engine oil, oxidized metal, and rain-soaked mud was overpowering. Every step on the damp earth made a quiet, squelching sound. It felt exactly like walking into the boardroom that morning where people sat under bright lights discussing evidence as if justice could be arranged by paperwork. But at night, justice meant wading through mud, dodging blades in the dark, and looking for survivors. Amidst scrap metal, Lily tugged my sleeve, whispering, "The blue USB is hidden inside an old, decommissioned ambulance. When Dr. King gave it to me, he just said to hide it where no one would look. I know this place because the hospital used to rent a temporary unit here for scrapped vehicles." I looked at her, my voice catching. "Why didn't you just run? You're so young. You could have thrown the USB away and pretended you knew nothing." Lily gave a crooked smile. "I thought about it. When I saw your file, I nearly fainted from fear. I've only been a nurse for 2 years, still paying off my student loans. But I remembered when my mom was in hospital, a nurse secretly helped us change doctors because she noticed the medication was wrong. My mom lived for another 3 years. I figured if that nurse had looked the other way, I wouldn't have had those 3 years with my mom." My throat closed up. Good people don't announce their arrival in our lives with heroic poses. They are just a young nurse, someone who was once saved by another who now cannot bear to turn a blind eye. Those small acts were the only actions, Tardy things making me believe that, no matter how filthy the world got, humanity hadn't entirely rotted away. We found the old ambulance at the back of the yard. The tires were flat, the poplings Ender 21s, white paint peeling, the back doors secured with a rusted chain. David used bolt cutters to snap the chain. The inside was dark and smelled of old plastic. Lily crawled in first, rummaging beneath the oxygen cylinder compartment. A few seconds later, she pulled out a small plastic packet wrapped in multiple Brahmins. Layers of tape. Inside was a blue USB drive. Just as I took it, the sound of slow, sarcastic clapping echoed through the plastery-like lest yard. Very moving. An heiress, a nurse, and a washed-up private eye. If this wasn't my business, I'd have loved to stand and watch a bit longer. From behind a row of containers, a middle-aged man stepped out. He wore a gray shirt untucked over his trousers, of average height, neat hair, and a face so incredibly ordinary that if you passed him in a pub, you wouldn't look twice. But it was that exact ordinariness that sent a chill down my spine. Evil that looks evil is easy to guard against. Evil that looks like anyone else on the party and street is what's truly terrifying. David stepped in front of us, his voice dropping into a low growl. William. Davius. The man smiled faintly. Long time no see, Dave. You looked a lot more respectable back when you wore a Met Police uniform. David spat back. And you're still the same, doing the absolute dirtiest work. While dressing like you're off to a PTA meeting. William wasn't angry. He just shifted his gaze to me, evaluating me slowly. Madeline Arthur, I've heard a lot about you. Younger than I imagined, and much more stubborn. Dr. Bennett severely underestimated you. I gripped the USB tightly. Where is Philip? William tilted his head. Two men slid open the doors of a nearby shipping container. Inside, Philip was tied to a metal chair, his head slumped forward. His shirt was soaked in blood at the shoulder and the corner of his mouth. My heart nearly stopped. I screamed his name, but Philip only stirred slightly. Not fully conscious. William sighed, like an adult scolding a child. You see, clever people always suffer because they think they control the board. Your solicitor is the same. Planting a tracker, sending data bursts, calling the press, calling the cops. Very good, very textbook. But he forgot that in the real world, before the file reaches the judge, the man carrying it can get his fingers broken. I stared at him, forcing my voice to stay level. What do you want? Simple. The blue USB, the nurse's phone, and every copy of the files you have. In exchange, I let your solicitor, the nurse, and Mr. Clark walk out of here. As for you, you will sign some documents retracting your allegations and you will go abroad to recuperate for a while. The living should know how to choose. What's left to keep? Behind me, Lily trembled. David muttered, Don't listen to him. Scum like this. Don't keep their word. William smiled. I keep my word when people are sensible. I looked at Philip inside the container. The blood on his face made my eyes throb with pain. I remembered his hand giving me the tracker bracelet, his voice telling me to run if things went south. But how could I run when he was sitting there, beaten half to death because of me? Just then, Thomas stepped out from behind William. He was no longer wearing his immaculate suit. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his face gaunt and wired. When he saw me, he still tried to force a smile. Maddie, you've had such a hard time. Give me the USB, and I'll tell William to let Philip go. I stared at him and asked, Do you even have the right to say that to me? Any more? Thomas took a step forward, but William raised a hand to stop him. Just that small gesture made me realize instantly. Thomas was not the mastermind here. He had thought he controlled everything, but in the end, he was just a sharpened knife wielded by someone else. That realization stripped away the terror he used to make me feel. He was still evil, but behind him stood something much colder, much deeper, something that had been embedded in the system for a very long time. Victoria Hale appeared behind Thomas as well. She lacked the arrogant poise she had in the operating theater. Her hair was a mess, her face ghostly pale. The moment she saw Lily was still alive, raw panic flashed in her eyes. William, that girl has the recording, we have to get it back. If your people had cleaned up properly from the start, I wouldn't have to be out here in this filth. Thomas clenched his jaw. William, we can still handle this. We just need the Paul, USB, and Madeline. I told you to stop speaking as if you make the decisions here. William turned. To him, his voice calm but lethal enough to shut Thomas up instantly. You're a surgeon. You're good at cutting people open. But dissecting a body and managing a game are two very different things. I saw a flicker of genuine fear in Thomas's eyes. The man who used to make me tremble was suddenly reduced to a terrified subordinate. Perhaps karma begins. The moment a predator realizes they are merely prey in the hands of something bigger. Inside the container, Philip shifted. He lifted his head, fighting to open his Brahmin eyes. When he saw me, he shook his head. A barely perceptible movement, even beaten to a pulp. His first instinct was to signal me not to hand over the evidence. My heart ached so fiercely it somehow forced me into total clarity. I turned to Lily. The young girl was looking at me too. In her eyes there was fear and tears, but also a decision. Before I could react, Lily stepped forward, holding her phone up high. This has already auto-synced to a cloud drive. You can kill us, but you can't delete it. Victoria lunged forward reflexively. Everything happened in a blur of motion. One of William's thugs lunged at Lily. I grabbed her, pulling her back. David. threw himself in front of us as a human shield. And from behind the containers, the roar of approaching engines ripped through the night. It seemed the backup David had called had finally pinpointed the Rosted Hers in Onion C's location, using the GPS on my bracelet and the data Philip had transmitted. Before he was captured, for the first time, William's expression cracked. He bellowed, "Get the USB!" A man lunged at me, grabbing my arm. I stumbled backward, tripping over the step of the old ambulance. The USB slipped from my grasp, falling into the mud. Lily dived for it, snatching it up. Simultaneously, a deafening gunshot rang out. I don't know who fired it, but I saw Lily's body jerk violently, and she collapsed against me. "Lily!" I caught her. My hand touched her back. It was warm and wet. Blood seeped through my fingers. Lily gasped for air. Her face, already pale, was now paper white. She weakly shoved the USB into my hand, her lips moving. "You have to live. If you live, they can't bury the dead anymore." I held her, tears streaming uncontrollably. "Be quiet. Don't speak. You're not going to die." The young girl managed a fragile smile. "I haven't even got my paycheck this month. I doubt I'll die that easily." Her words tore my heart to shreds. Amidst the chaos, armed police officers and David's contacts swarmed the yard from both sides. William Davies was tackled to the ground after a brief struggle. Victoria screamed as she was dragged down into the mud. Thomas, taking advantage of the mayhem, sprinted towards a black saloon car parked behind the containers. I saw him turn his head to look at me one last time. That gaze contained no love, no acting. It held only the toxic bitterness of a man who had lost everything but refused to accept defeat. I wanted to scream for someone to chase him, but Lily was growing weaker in my arms. Philip had been cut loose. He staggered towards us, dropping to his knees beside me despite being covered in blood himself. His voice was completely hoarse. "Apply pressure to the wound. The ambulance is almost here." I did as he said, my hands trembling violently. Lily looked at Philip, then at me. Her voice was so faint I had to lean in to hear it. "Solicitor Knight, make sure you protect her. She acts tough, but she's actually very soft-hearted." Philip choked back a breath, answering very softly, "Wake up and you can insult her yourself. I don't take messages for patients." Lily let out a weak laugh, then coughed up a small amount of blood. I cried so hard I couldn't even see her face clearly anymore. The sirens finally wailed into the yard. When the paramedics lifted Lily onto the stretcher, her hand clung to mine until the very last second before she let go. Inside the ambulance, I sat amidst the smell of iodine and the blare of the Percenti sirens. Both my hands were stained with Lily's blood. Philip sat opposite me. His shoulder had been hastily bandaged, his face white as a sheet, but his eyes never left me. David sat near the doors, speaking rapidly to a police officer on the phone. William and Victoria were in custody, but Thomas had escaped. I looked down at the blue USB in my palm. It was smeared with mud and a streak of blood. Philip used his good hand to pass me a tablet. "Can you open it?" I plugged the USB into the device. The password was my mother's birthday, same as the one with Dr. Lawson. A directory opened. It contained the list of 12 victims who had died anomalous deaths, forged organ donation consent forms, money laundering ledgers, names of corrupt doctors, names of recipient patients, and one final folder. The folder was named, "If you are reading this, it means I failed to protect you." I stared at those words, my chest hurting so much I couldn't breathe. Outside, the ambulance windows, the London night rushed by in reverse. Lily was lying in front of us, paramedics actively performing CPR. Philip sat across from me, quietly resting his bandaged hand on the edge of the seat near mine. Not touching, but close. I opened my father's folder. An audio file appeared. My father's voice filled the space over the wail of the sirens. Exhausted, hoarse, but it was still the voice of the man who had called me his daughter for 31 years. "Maddie, if you hear this, I am so sorry. I suspected it too late, and I put my trust in the wrong person." I bit my lip until it bled. Philip's hand finally, gently covered mine, like a reminder that I was still here, still alive, and still had to listen to the rest of the truth my father left behind. His voice grew weaker toward the end, but every word hammered into my soul. "You don't have to force yourself to be the strongest woman in the world. You just have to make sure you never let evil people decide who you are. I clutched the blue USB. Lily's blood had dried into a dark crust against the plastic casing. Philip's shoulder was still bleeding through the temporary and bandages. Everyone in the ambulance sat in silence after my father's voice faded. There are truths that, when spoken, don't bring relief. They merely give the pain a name, a face, and a clear shape so you know exactly what you must keep living for. Lily was rushed straight into surgery at an NHS hospital David trusted. As the Fady acetation dadia theater doors swung shut, I stood in the corridor. My hands were still bloody. I stared at the red, "In use" sign above the doors, feeling completely hollowed out. A young woman who hadn't even lived out her youth was lying in there, simply because she couldn't bear to let me be dragged to my death. I had thought I was the greatest victim in this story, but the deeper I went, the more I realized how many people around me had been crushed in silence, simply because their names weren't deemed important enough for the front pages. Philip emerged after having his wounds properly stitched. He was still pale, wearing a baggy hospital gown draped over his shoulders as a makeshift shirt. He looked simultaneously exhausted and inappropriately comical. I looked at him, wanting to ask if it hurt, but what came out of my mouth was, "Wearing that, you look more like an escaped patient than I did." Philip blinked in surprise, then gave a soft laugh. "If you still have the energy for sarcasm, that's a good sign. I thought after tonight I'd lose my title as the driest speaker in the group." David, standing nearby on his phone, turned and interjected, "Nobody is taking that title from you, solicitor. Miss Madeline is just recovering her capacity for mockery post-trauma." I laughed, but the tears fell again. These weren't laughs of joy. They were laughs because if you didn't laugh, you would collapse right there in the hospital corridor. Philip stepped forward and handed me a tissue. He didn't wipe my tears for me, nor did he put his arm around my shoulder the way Thomas did, whenever he wanted to feign tenderness. He just stood close enough so I knew I wasn't alone, but far enough that I could still stand on my own 2 feet. Near dawn, the surgeon came out and told us Lily had survived the worst of it, but needed to remain under strict observation. I slumped into a plastic chair, only then realizing my legs were completely numb. But if we just handed the files to the police in silence, Thomas could still use his high society connections to drag things out, blame Victoria and William, and paint himself as a husband framed by his wife. I need to do one more thing. Philip knew what I was thinking. I had thought of it while sitting in the Wurcher ambulance. Thomas had used the media to paint me as an insane woman who absconded from a hospital. I had to use that exact same spotlight to force everyone to look at the truth. Not because I liked being on camera, but because there are shadows that fear only one thing: being called by their true name in front of a crowd. The press conference was held that afternoon at a hotel in Mayfair. Philip had opposed me doing it before getting proper rest. But I asked him, "If we wait another day, how many more lies can Thomas spin?" He went silent for a few seconds, then started making calls. His voice was steady and sharp as he problems arranged the press, legal counsel, board representatives, the authorities, and even an NHS rep to confirm Lily's status. I swapped my blood-stained clothes for a cream silk blouse and black trousers. Looking in the mirror in the hotel holding room, the face staring back was gaunt. The scratch on my neck was angry and red, my eyes swollen from crying. I didn't look like a CEO ready to address the nation. I looked like someone who had just crawled out of an abyss. But perhaps that was exactly how it should be. A survivor doesn't need to look flawless. She just needs to be able to stand. Before I walked out, Philip handed me a stack of cue cards. "This is the sequence of evidence. You don't need to recount every piece of trauma. Just hit these milestones. I'll handle the legal supplementary details." I took them, glancing at the white bandage on his shoulder visible beneath his collar. "You should be in a hospital bed." "So should you," he replied deadpan. It seemed neither of us was very good at following medical advice today. I looked at him, feeling my heart soften. Amidst a web of deceit, a man who promised nothing exaggerated, who didn't use emotion to tie me down, but simply handed me the right documents at the exact right time, made me feel more respected than I had in all my years of being a wife. I whispered, "When this is over, I'm buying you a proper dinner. Not cold toast. In a safe house." Philip looked at me, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. I acknowledge that promise. It holds binding spiritual value. The doors opened, and the roar of the press pack washed over me like a tidal wave. I stepped up to the podium, looking down at dozens of lenses, dozens of eyes, and dozens of phones broadcasting live. My name is Madeline Arthur. Over the past few days, I have been called an on-to, absconding patient, a paranoid delusional, and a wife manipulated into turning against her husband. I am standing here today to tell you that I am entirely lucid, and I have the evidence to prove it. The screens behind me displayed each document. I spoke just enough to explain each one. A journalist stood up and asked, "Miss Arthur, Dr. Thomas Bennett stated you have a psychiatric evaluation proving you are being manipulated. How do you respond?" I stared straight into the nearest camera lens. If a husband poisons his wife, and then is the same person to sign a document certifying she has lost her mind, that paper doesn't prove the wife is insane. It only proves the husband prepared his exit strategy very thoroughly. The room erupted. Philip stood to the side, his eyes never leaving me. David stood by the door with his arms crossed, looking ready to throw anyone who rushed the stage out the window. Just as the press conference was nearing its end, a separate live stream link suddenly went viral among the journalists' phones. Thomas appeared on the video. He was sitting in a brightly lit room, wearing a white shirt, his face gaunt, the very picture of a cornered man desperately maintaining his dignity. He spoke with agonizing sorrow. Madeline is currently highly agitated. The BDSD-9 documents she is presenting have been fabricated. I am her husband. I have no desire to press charges against her. I only want her to receive the correct medical treatment before it's too late. A journalist played the video audio out loud. I looked at that face on the Ronthberg.Lone screens, suddenly feeling incredibly detached. There was a time when a slight frown from him would make me worry I had exhausted him. Now, even if he wept in front of the entire world, all that was left inside me was cold ash. Thomas continued, "If Madeline is listening to this, I want you to know I am still waiting for you to come home." I grabbed the microphone. "Which home? The VIP suite where you sedated me? Or Theater 3 where you prepared to cut my heart out?" The room went dead silent. Philip stepped up beside me and played a new audio file. It was the recording from my phone, captured during the car ride when Thomas first brought me to the hospital. His voice was crystal clear. "Take her straight to the prep room. The drug has taken effect. Ensure there is no damage to the myocardium." Thomas's face on the live stream finally cracked. He glanced off camera, realizing the audio had destroyed his final facade. The live stream cut abruptly, but it was too late. The news exploded like fire hitting petrol. The Metropolitan Police formally announced they were opening an investigation into the illegal organ trafficking ring. Thomas's hospital faced an emergency raid by health inspectors. The board of Arthur Pharmaceuticals issued a statement confirming my reinstatement and severing all ties with Thomas. His accounts were frozen. Victoria and William were officially remanded in custody, but Thomas had fled. It wasn't until that evening, as I returned from visiting Lily, that David received the call. Thomas Bennett had been arrested at Heathrow Airport while attempting to leave the UK on a forged passport. Standing outside Lily's ward, hearing the news, I didn't feel the immediate rush of relief I thought I would. Perhaps a part of me was still mourning the man who once stood in the rain, holding a bouquet, waiting for me to finish work. But reality dictated that he was now in handcuffs at an airport, exposed as a criminal. I went to the police station to give my statement at midnight. Thomas was being escorted down the corridor. He was handcuffed, his shirt wrinkled, his hair disheveled. But when he saw me, he still tried to muster that old smile. "Maddie," he called out, his voice hoarse. "I really did love you once." I stopped. For a fleeting microsecond, my heart ached like an old bruise being pressed. But then I looked at the hands that had planned to harvest my heart, the eyes that had cried fake tears at my father's funeral, the lips that had called me home while prepping the anesthetic. I replied, "No, you only loved the feeling of owning everything that was mine." Thomas's smile died completely. He was led away, his silhouette disappearing around the corner. I stood there for a long time, until Philip walked up beside. Me, he didn't ask if I was hurting, he just handed me a paper cup of warm water. I took it, giving a tired smile. Have you noticed? My life lately is entirely saved by warm water and legal paperwork. Philip looked at me, his voice gentler than usual. As long as it saves you. I took a sip. Through the glass window behind me, Lily was sleeping peacefully, the heart monitor beeping in a steady rhythm. For the first time in days, that sound didn't feel like a countdown to death. It sounded like a reminder that we were all still alive, still possessing the right to tell our own stories through the beating of our own hearts. 6 months later, I saw Thomas again in court at the Old Bailey. He wore a standard gray prison tracksuit, his hair cropped short, his face hollowed out. But he still tried to maintain the rigid posture of a surgeon attending Elias Brader's medical conference rather than a man awaiting his verdict. I sat in the public gallery reserved for the victims. Philip was next to me, a thick stack of case files in front of him. Behind us sat Lily, Dr. Lawson, Dr. King, and several families of the victims taken by the trafficking ring. It was drizzling in London that day. Before we entered the courtroom, Lily, leaning on a crutch, looked at me and laughed. Miss Madeline, I did my makeup a bit heavier today. Just in case the press catch me on camera, I need to look presentable. I looked at the girl who had nearly died for me. Her lips were still a bit pale, but her eyes were brighter than ever. I replied, "Don't worry. If they catch a bad angle, I'll have the PR team at Arthur Pharmaceuticals fix the footage for you." Lily giggled, then winced as her stitches pulled. Philip, standing nearby, muttered quietly, "Could you two save the PR strategy discussions until after the sentencing?" Lily blinked at him. "Solicitor Knight, you truly are a legal man. You won't even let a girl look glamorous under pressure." I couldn't help but laugh, and Philip sighed helplessly, pushing up his glasses, though the corners of his mouth turned up. Those small laughs outside the proscenium courtroom didn't erase the tragedy, but they reminded us that we weren't just here to recount our misery, we were here to walk past it. The trial was heavy. The Crown prosecutor read out a lengthy indictment. Every charge fell like a stone, falsifying medical records, administering poison, leading to the manslaughter of Arthur, conspiracy to murder for financial gain, involvement in an illegal smuggling ring, forging a will, false imprisonment, and witness intimidation. Victoria sat in the dock beside Thomas, her face ashen, stripped of all her surgical arrogance. William Davies maintained a terrifyingly blank expression, as if this were just a business negotiation gone wrong. The judge delivered the sentences that afternoon. Thomas, Victoria, and William received severe, lengthy prison terms. The police investigation into the wider hospital network was still expanding. Upon hearing her sentence, Victoria broke down sobbing. William kept his head, bowed, expressionless. Thomas turned around to look at me one last time. I didn't avoid his gaze, but I had nothing left to say. The marriage certificate that once bound us had been replaced by a prison sentence, and that was the truest ending for a union built on lies. A few weeks later, I officially returned to helm Arthur Pharmaceuticals. My first act was to establish a foundation to support victims of medical malpractice and the families affected by the trafficking ring, fulfilling the way charitable clauses my father had written in his real will. I didn't try to play the role of a fearless, ironclad heroine for the cameras. There were nights I still suffered from insomnia. There were days when walking past a hospital and smelling antiseptic made me shiver. Sometimes hearing the fend beep of a heart monitor during a checkup made me clench my fists to stop my hands from shaking. But I was no longer terrified of that sound, because I knew that this heart of mine had been appraised, priced, scheduled for extraction, and nearly placed in an icebox for money and power. Yet, in the end, it was still here. Still inside. My chest beating with a normal, proud rhythm. And this time, the man standing beside me was someone truly willing to protect it.